Good morning, everyone. Nice to see that Heli and Iván are already online and ready to present their reports. I'm Rima Povilionienė. Daina will join us as soon as possible, as there are some traffic problems accessing the conference venue. So I will start this session. And the first presentation will be delivered by Iván César Morales Flores, who is a Doctor of Musicology from the University of Oviedo. And he is going to speak about special period in time of peace, emergence, exodus, and evasion on the Cuban music map of the 90s. And now we'll show the video presentation that was pre-recorded by Iván, and then we will join the live discussion as he is online. So let's listen to the video and then let's talk.
The political changes that shook Eastern Europe between 1989 and 1991 brought about one of the biggest fractures in the political and sociocultural life of Cuba, the ideological and economic satellite of the Soviet Union in the Caribbean region after the revolution. The impact caused by the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Comecon, together with intensification of the US embargo, translated into an unprecedented crisis. According to some experts, one of the biggest economic recessions of the 20th century. The so-called special period in times of peace was an euphemistic title the government of the island used to refer to the zero option. The levels of individual and social consumption of the Cuban people plummeted, and the phrases "there is not" and "in the fight" became everyday refrain. The immediate result was the massive immigration of thousands of Cubans to the United States, which highlight the most dramatic and unusual image of this tough period that peaked in the summer of 1994 with the Cuban drafters crisis. The Cuban musical map of those critical years consisted of different musical styles and genres like salsa, trova, rock, jazz, hip-hop, and was marked by two main events: the emergence of timba as a transgressor genre within the scope of popular dance music, and the exodus of a great number of classical composers who emigrated to Europe, United States, and Latin America. These are indeed two sides of one of the most significant periods of the recent history of Cuban music that, as we will prove, will offer us a privileged perspective of its social and musical incidences. With the boom of popular dance music and timba especially, many substantial changes took place in the musical discourse, which became much more complex in its persistent fusion, hybridization, and crisscrossing of stylistic and performative features. Together with these, new social and ethical archetypes developed during the everyday occurrences of popular life. On one hand, the scope of classical music unveils one of the most graphic behaviors of the Cuban society of the 90s, the search of a new future beyond the borders of the Caribbean island, and with that the confrontation of two complementary discourses, the one belonging to the old composers of the 60s, 70s and 80s, which even today has been established as reference marker for the music that is composed within the island, and the one belonging to the diaspora composers characterized by new codes, scenes, and identity resources from their transterritoriality. In spite of their differences, and as we will see during this presentation, evasion is the feature shared by both music scenes. The effect of this historic moment in the Cuban society is perceived both in the multifaceted physiognomy music acquires inside the island and abroad, as well as in the social and cultural uses music entails as a process of constructing new identities. The main objective of this proposal is to delve into the dynamics of these complex processes from a sociological, cultural, and musical perspective. Timba imposes itself in the 90s as a music and dance expression of urban roots and important popularity within the Cuban society of the special period. It had such a great impact that for many the term timba has served to refer to, by intuitive convention, the entire Cuban dance production of the 90s, regardless of styles and specific codes. From a commercial point of view, it is usually used as a marketing concept that tries to differentiate the national song and salsa compositions of recent years from those produced internationally. From a musical perspective, timba offers new treatments of timbral functional layers characteristic of Cuban music. The extreme fragmentation and counter-accentuation of its sonority has become an undistinguishable feature of exacerbated tension, aggressiveness, and emancipation. Scholars such as Vincenzo Perna consider timba a result of an innovative fusion of elements drawn from multiple directions, while musical style, eclectic and open to disparate and even contrasting musical influences. Danilo Orozco, for his part, highlights the dislocation of elements and inter-stylistic confluences as the definitive feature of this tendency of musical style, falling into the definition of intergenre. In other words, a behavior timba makes evident in the convergence of characteristic features of son montuno, salsa, rumba, mambo, ritual and festive music of Afro-Cuban roots, as well as rap, hip-hop, jazz, cumbia and funk. This new style within the Cuban music and dance tradition contributes the use of a wider spectrum of percussion, brass and wind instruments, a tendency to a progressive acceleration of the musical tempo as inductive effect of extensive climatic elements, known in the musical jargon of timba as bomb or masacote, and in the dance jargon as tembleque or despelote, frenzy. The use of continuous fragmentation in the bass line and the tumbao sonero of the piano, as well as the development of a more narrated soloist line alternating with more parlando choruses. Its manner of dancing directly inherits from rumba elements of Bantu origin, as well as Abacua is characterized by brusque, dislocated and aggressive movements of sexual connotation. The main bands of this social and musical phenomenon are numerous and to a great extent composed of a wide range of virtuoso musicians who studied in the professional music schools of the island. Among them stand out José Luis Cortés y NG La Banda, to whom the creation of timba is attributed. Also Paulo FG y su élite, David Calzado y la charanga habanera, among others. As an example, I bring a fragment of the music video of one of the most representative songs of those years, La Bruja, The Witch, by José Luis Cortés y NG La Banda.
Salgo de la casa aburrido, irritado, a buscar tu silueta, desesperado. Me encuentro a mí mismo, solo y cansado. La vida es un circo, todos somos payasos, sean los magos, todo me da asco. Y esto me pasa porque faltas tú. Te crees la mejor, te crees un artista, porque vas en turitaxi por buena vista, buscando lo imposible, porque a ti te falto yo también. Cambiaste mi amor por diversiones baratas, el precio del espíritu no se subasta, por eso te comparo yo con una bruja. Tú lo que eres una bruja, tú eres una loca, una bruja sin sentimientos, tú eres una bruja. Eres una loca, una arrebatada, una desquiciada, tú eres una bruja. Dice, una bruja sin sentimientos, tú eres una bruja. Dice, tú te crees la mejor, tú te crees un artista, porque vas en turitaxi por buena vista, buscando lo imposible, porque a ti te falto yo también. Cambiaste mi amor por diversiones baratas, el precio del espíritu no se subasta, por eso te comparo yo como una bruja. Tú eres una bruja, tú eres una loca, una bruja sin sentimientos, tú eres una bruja, tú eres una loca y tu cintura me provoca. Tú eres una bruja,
frequently, the lyrics of timba songs refer to chronicles of marginal neighborhoods and touristic centers that portray the Cuban reality of the special period. At the same time, they encourage fun and the pursuit of dreams of fortune. In these songs, Afro-Cuban religious traditions take a privileged space, whereas the image of women gains special attention as objects of desire and moral criticism, making reference to the rebirth of a new prostitution and its protagonists, the jineteras, reference in the song we just listened to. The linguistic codes used in the dialogues of intertextuality are identified with vulgar terms, thus creating a new popular phraseology. The aforementioned, together with the creation of new gestural codes and manners of dressing due to the boom of timba, draws us to Fritz's idea that taste in popular music does not simply derive from our social constructed identities. They also contribute to shape them. From this same perspective, scholar López Cano asserts that within timba lies the fundamental factor in the construction of the cultural archetype of the tough boy of Havana. The chill that protects certain sectors when facing their reality, it is neither a wail that cries for what is going on nor hypocrisy that denies the reality. It is cynicism that helps endure and normalize life in the middle of everything that is going on. This is the reason why some scholars of this musical and social phenomenon recognize the lyrics of timba as voice of the street. Though defying, they are non-committed lyrics that subvert from evasion or from the ellipses of the official discourse on race, gender, class and nation, which is more than enough for them to regularly become the target of official criticism and censorship. All these features lead us to reflect on the possibility of conforming a new identity, an identity that either on account of the new ideals that the lyrics of timba promote from their noisy silence, or the new archetypes that emerge from the timba idols, young male singers, sexy and living an ostentatious lifestyle that significantly detaches from the revolutionary ideal of that new man that Ernesto Guevara mentions in his 1965 letter. The new man that emerged from the interaction of timba with that scene of social and economic crisis of the special period undermines the socialistic ethics. His paradigms talk about a new materialism, about the normalization of a new ethical and social way of life, about the aggravation of vulgarity, about the search of an ideological and spiritual refuge in Afro-Cuban Santeria, and all in all the disillusionment with the Cuban Revolution. Running parallel to that scene, classical music reveals an ambivalent behavior. On one hand, the official discourse of the island persists in empowering the old protagonists of the Cuban musical vanguard of the 60s and 70s, as well as the exponents of the neo-romantic and neo-nationalist aesthetics of the 80s. Among them, Harold Gramaches, Juan Blanco, Carlos Fariñas, Roberto Valera, and Leo Brauer, who is indisputably the most well-known abroad. On the other hand, it powerfully draws attention the reaction of evasion or escape shown by younger composers who have recently graduated from the composition department of the University of Arts in Havana, the only existing institution in the country. During the 90s, the idyllic surroundings, almost extemporaneous, of the University of Arts graduate an important number of composers. At present, only a small number remains in the island. The objective data of this phenomenon reveals that out of 25 composers graduated between 1990 and 1999, only 5 remain in Cuban soil. And the biggest group of representatives of the Cuban diaspora of the end of the 20th and the turn of the 21st century live nowadays in the United States, Spain, Italy, Holland, Switzerland, Mexico, Uruguay, El Salvador, and Ecuador. The migratory experience of these Cuban composers has turned their music into a space of fundamental interest in the recent history of Cuban classical music. Their proposals are marked by identity cleavage and hybridization, a dialogic and liminal space in which diasporic subjects experience double and even plural identifications that are constitutive of hybrid forms of identity, as Braziel and Manur claim. In Bra's words, their proposal moved through networks of transnational identifications encompassing imagined and encountered communities, invariably subject to continuous dynamics of deterritorialization and reterritorialization. As Garcia Canclini states, two processes which refer to the loss of the natural relation of culture to geographical and social territories and, at the same time, certain relative, partial territorial relocations of new and old symbolic productions. Among these emigrated composers, we can mention Ileana Pérez Velázquez, Eduardo Morales Caso, Keila Orozco, Ailén Carvajal, and as maximum exponent, Luis Aguirre, who lived in Aalborg since 2003. Aguirre's music is defined by its ritual character and by the thunderous and frantic sonorities that summon its magico-religious Afro-Cuban lineage. Religion is undoubtedly one of the guiding forces driving the creativity of this composer in his reterritorialized setting. Circumventing more external means of musical representation, Aguirre's hyper-Afro-Cuban aesthetic proves the visceral inner world of black expression. Anchored in the experience of Santerias and Palo Montes ritual practices, his music is quite distant from the more or less epidermic and romantic approach to Afro-Cubanism that has characterized the creative output of many of his compatriots. More heterogeneous and intemperate, his aesthetic breaks boundaries and opens up spaces for an expanded range of strategies and a wider canvas of creative possibilities. In close complicity with his performers, who are always established virtuosos able to master a multitude of skills, Aguirre's music is defined by the shaping of microsensual sonic gestures. Converging in these gestures are complex counterpoints, intricate rhythmic designs, saturated microtonal sonorities, and wide spectrums of pitch and noise displayed over an array of physical gestures carrying a wealth of densely woven meaning. In other words, Aguirre appropriates any resource within his reach to make manifest the most secret and blaring effects surrounding the elusive and quasi-psychedelic inner experience of ancestral Afro-Cuban rituals. As an example, we will listen to a fragment of his string quartet, Ochosi, Liturgia de la Palabra Divina, interpreted by the famous Arditi String Quartet. To conclude, we can assert that the political changes that took place in Eastern Europe between 1989 and 1991 deeply affected the Cuban music and society of the 90s. The new codes, scenes, and identity resources which characterize its multifaceted physiognomy inside the island and abroad, either in the scope of popular or classical music, reveal beyond its debatable evasion a special prominence in the processes of constructing, negotiating, and transforming sociocultural and collective identities. Here, the old Newman cannot find space enough within the musical imaginary of the present generations. The tough voice of Cuban timba and the emigrated composers of classical music express in their musical work the transgression and conformation of old and new subjectivities. Deepening into this musical and sociocultural phenomenon from an open modern and integration approach constitutes a more than necessary exercise for the study of the Cuban music of the 90s. It is an unavoidable action to understand from a more encompassing dimension the changing interstices of the Cuban reality of the last decades. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you very much for accepting my participation in this special Congress. My English isn't good enough. I apologize for it. She will be my translator for any question you can ask me. So please, I just need you to speak slowly. Thank you very much.
We have to repeat the question, yes?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Iván, I wanted to ask you about Cuban timba genre. Was it an anonymous composition, or are there certain authorships attributed to academic composers or amateur composers? Who were the authors of this timba?
Okay, ¿cuáles eran las ofertas de esa timba? Y algo preguntó de la música académica.
Bueno, la timba fue una de las manifestaciones, digamos, de mayor éxito, de mayor acogida durante estos años.
The timba was the most successfully style of music during those years.
Generalmente los músicos que formaban parte de esta manifestación o expresión musical por excelencia de esta Cuba del periodo especial eran formados en las escuelas, digamos, profesionales de música del país.
Almost every musician that took place in those Cuban bands and make this popular music were musicians that they study at all the Cuban professional schools music.
Esta manifestación, evidentemente, es de un alto nivel de popularidad, sí, por lo cual tenía lugar en aquellos espacios de máxima audiencia dentro del país.
This was very popular music, and they were take place on the big places for the people, the common people, not academic who listen academical music, you know, the people who don't have any academical formation.
Okay. De acuerdo.
Thank you for the answer. So we have one question from the chat from online listeners, from John Bandever. Yes, I will make a quotation from him. I loved your talk. As someone who studies Russian rap and hip hop, I had a question about the genre of timba. By what I saw, the almost spoken recitative reminded me of hip hop, MC, and rap, while the sexuality reminded me of the identity of rap notions. Could you speak on the rap and hip hop influences, as rap only came to Cuba in 1990s? Was the sexual identity and bad boy status influences of the American hip hop genre being born during this time? The pursuit of dreams and objectiving of women sounds right in the line with American hip hop mentality.
Bueno, en rasgos generales, la música cubana desde muchos tiempos atrás pues tiene una influencia muy directa de la cultura norteamericana, de la cercanía que existe geográficamente entre los dos países.
Because our nearly geographical position, American music, in this case hip hop, we have influence of this music. What?
Okay. Directamente en estos años, pues por supuesto también es un momento de gran apogeo del hip hop en Estados Unidos, y eso también llega evidentemente como influencia a la escena o al escenario cubano.
And the importance of hip hop in the United States became to Cuba and make an important important participation on the Cuban music.
Sin embargo, todo, digamos, el contenido, digamos, de aspecto sexual o de sexualidad que puede haber presente en la música de la isla tiene mucho que ver, incluso ya desde nuestros ancestros africanos, incluso, ¿no? Sí, no es algo que directamente tenga que ver en este momento por una influencia americana, en el caso.
But the sexual textuality in our music is not exactly from the American or hip hop music. It's from our African, I don't know the word, ancestors, our African ancestors, all the people that we have in our roots from Africa.
Incluso en nuestras músicas del siglo XIX, incluso principio del XX, pues hay muchas canciones, muchas expresiones musicales en las que ya los propios textos pues tienen connotaciones sexuales, siempre, generalmente, ¿no? Por lo que llamamos en Cuba doble sentido.
Even in our music of the 90s and early 20s, we have
doble sentido la música.
We have music with
siempre tiene un contenido sexual.
Our music have all the time a sexual content.
Trasfondo.
With that, we call that a double sense. It means two descriptions.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the answers.
Thank you.
Have we more questions? Just I look at the chat. No, we have not more questions. So, Iván, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, and have a nice day. Yeah, thank you. Now we will start another presentation from Heli Reimann. She will talk about the mythologization of the myths of Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival. And Dr. Heli Reimann is a researcher at the Sibelius Academy of the University of Arts in Helsinki. Her ongoing project includes a monograph of the Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival, which will be published by Routledge as a part of the Transnational Studies in Jazz book series in 2021. So, Heli, we are waiting for a presentation.
Good morning to everybody. I first want to thank all the organizers that you still decided to arrange the event despite all those obstacles we have at the moment. And Rima and Ruta, thank you for that. As it was said already during the introduction, the last 5 years, my work has been related to investigation of one particular event, which was the Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival. And a couple of months ago, I submitted the manuscript, so I hope the book will be published soon. And today I can really introduce a very small part of it. I managed to, the material I managed to collect was really huge. I made around 60 interviews and collected around 1,000 pages of archival material. Today I took one of the aspects which actually inspired me to initiate the entire research. And those are the myths of the event, because there are really a lot of stories circulating around the event. So one of my tasks was whether to find a proof whether the myths are, what is the truth value of those myths, whether they have any kind, can I find any proof for refuting them or agreeing with the myth. My first question here is why we should talk about Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival, why it was important. First, in Estonian cultural context, or in the context of the Estonian jazz history, it was the highest point in the evolution of the jazz festival tradition in Estonia. But unfortunately, the event marked the termination of the entire series of jazz festivals in Estonia. So Estonian jazz history, they consider the year 1949 as the year of the first jazz festival. Of course, the first event was not a real festival, like it was just a meeting of a couple of ensembles. Secondly, not was Tallinn 67 the high day for Estonian jazz, but the entire Soviet jazz culture celebrated it as the peak of its post-Stalinist new awakening. Then Tallinn 67 was the first international festival of such a magnitude. The first international jazz festival in Soviet Union took place in 1966 in Tallinn. But in 1967, there were groups from Poland, Sweden, Finland, and Charles Lloyd Quartet from America. And of course, the most sensational act was undoubtedly the attendance of Charles Lloyd Quartet. In 1967, by the way, the group was at the peak of its fame. And to see and hear such a jazz celebrity in the Soviet Union was unprecedented. And of course, the most amount of legends or myths were produced by the incident relating to Lloyd's performance, the intervention of political authorities and their obstruction of the group's appearance on stage. So this was the element which further magnified the significance of the event. Here you can see the logo and the badge of the event, and the three old buildings in Tallinn, old town, which inspired the designer to include this element into the badge. Those are famous buildings called as Three Sisters in Tallinn. Here is some reference to the theory I prepared to Jan Assmann, historian Jan Assmann, who said that the mythical dimensions of history have nevertheless nothing to do with its truth values, since history turns into myth as soon as it is woven into the fabric of the present as remembered, narrated, and used. Here are some of the myths. To introduce all of them, it needs a couple of days, probably. But as I said, the biggest amount of myth is around Charles Lloyd, and especially how Charles Lloyd got to Tallinn. Then the second circle of questions is regards the reasons why jazz festivals were stopped. Who really made the decision that in Estonia after that time they cannot arrange any jazz festivals. Then there are a lot of myth-making comparisons between Tallinn 67 and the legendary Woodstock Festival, or there are references to Tallinn 67 as a Soviet Newport Festival. And finally, there are a lot of popular, simplistic and cliché myths which claim jazz in the Soviet Union as a tool of resistance, fighting for freedom, or betrayal of the homeland. So those are the myths regarding the forbiddenness of jazz in Soviet Union. How Charles Lloyd got to Tallinn, this is the myth I really managed to resolve. I did extensive research at New York Public Library, where is the collection of George Avakian, and the collection included all the correspondence and then really lot of material on the event. So those who have undertaken to discover the story of Lloyd's visit to Tallinn claim that the invitation for Lloyd's quartet to perform in Tallinn came from the Soviet side, whether from the organizing committee or the Russian jazz enthusiasts. But after examining the documents, I found that it was Avakian who proposed the quartet to Russian jazz enthusiasts, and whose almost aggressive persistence ultimately brought the quartet to the Soviet Union and the festival in Tallinn after more than a year-long effort. In my book, I write on it really a long story in the form of theatrical play, because it's really the entire event was the entire process of inviting Lloyd was, as I say here, almost more than a 1 year process. And it's a real detective story, and I'm not going to open it here. Sorry. And for those who don't know who was George Avakian, during his 98-year life, he managed to do really a lot of things. His career included major executive positions at the largest record companies. He brought into the light of musical arenas such famous jazz names like Charles Lloyd, Miles Davis, Keith Jarrett, Dave Brubeck. And interestingly, George Avakian received the Order of Lenin. It was in 1990. By the way, he himself seemed to be very proud of it. He mentions about his award many times in his autobiographical notes, and mentions also that he was one of the only cavalier of Order of Lenin in Soviet Union, in United States, but in real, Order of Lenin was given more than 400,000 people in the Soviet Union. So, but yes. In the right side, you can see George Avakian having his order, and then the right side, you can see him giving a speech at Tallinn Jazz Festival and holding the poster of Charles Lloyd. The problem, or why the problems occurred in the festival with a performance of Charles Lloyd, the reason for that was that Avakian arranged the tour and violated the official protocols in the Soviet Union. So this was the reason why all the problems occurred. And in those photographs, you can see 2 episodes which got the status of myth. They are told and retold tens of times. Below, you can see Charles Lloyd warming up before the concert on the second day, but there was an incident. that he was not allowed on stage during the second day. So just before stepping on stage, somebody came and said, "You are not allowed to go on stage." So this is the episode captured on this photograph before the concert. And the second collage of photographs illustrates another mythical episode where the quartet of Charles Lloyd was playing basketball near the hotel where they stayed. This story has also many versions. And here in this collage you can see the quartet performing on stage at the festival. They finally were allowed on stage during the last day of the festival. Here is another group of it concerned the sports hall and the number of listeners the sports hall could accommodate. So the sports hall could accommodate around 3,000 people, but in the documents I could read that the numbers, the estimates of audience numbers in sports hall running from 3,000 to 14,000. So this is a good example to show how the facts are really changing during they are presented and represented and so forth. Here in the bottom you can see the sports hall inside view, and up there is a sports hall with people rushing around it. The biggest myth framing to jazz in general is about its forbiddenness. So the jazz music is usually considered as a music of resistance, music fighting for freedom. Like I already said, there's a lot of cliche like expressions like today you play jazz, saxophone, tomorrow you betray your homeland. Here is my kind of counter-argument to those to this position. While during World War II, jazz was the symbol of friendship with the Allies. From 1946 until Stalin's death in 1953, this is a period known also as the Stanovщina, the music experienced the lowest level of political tolerance at any time in Soviet Union. But in the climate of the thaw in the late 1950s, the intolerance gradually eased, and if in the 1960s the idea of jazz as a proscribed music appeared, it was more related to inertia, to the individual taste of those situated to give approval to the music than the state-sanctioned anti-jazz politics. As I said, I made around 60 interviews with musicians, jazz fans and activists. One of the idea which occurred from those interviews related to the forbiddenness of jazz. Many interviews mentioned that this kind of tension between jazz and its status in Soviet Union, it generated the effect of forbidden fruit, the human desire to obtain unobtainable. So actually nobody of the musicians of the interviewees mentioned that the jazz was kind of tool of resistance, or they really fight it for freedom. There was a term or a phrase like jazz freedom, but jazz freedom meant a little bit different thing like we used to think. It was just more for them to select their freedom to select jazz as their favorite music, or they have freedom to select this music to play, but they did not really consider it as a tool for fighting against the regime. And finally, what I call as a new wave of myth making on the Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival. It occurred in early 1990s with regained independence and the rise of national consciousness. And this was related to the independence, the beginning of independence period in Estonia, when Estonia started to construct new narratives about its past. Memory boom related to the emergence of new independent states and the growing recognition of historical injustice at the end of the Cold War. And those ideas were displayed in the form of numerous commemorative practices. As a part of nation-building project Estonian jazz history, narratives began to highlight Tallinn 67 as an important milestone. Numerous commemorative acts appeared to celebrate the festival. Like first one was in 1990 during the days of Jazz and Blues Festival, where they invited the foreigners attending the Tallinn 67 to perform in their festival. Then in 1997, the 13th anniversary of the festival was by Charles Lloyd back to Tallinn, and he was awarded the Order of the City of Tallinn. Then the passing of 50 years was celebrated with several radio programs. A concert including Tallinn 67 participants as part of the largest annual jazz festival in Estonia. Jazz car and a jazz musical staged by students from Tallinn School of Music. And most recently, visual artist Lina used the event as the subject of her work at Riga's International Biennale of Contemporary Art, Riboka, in June 2018. And I would like to end my talk with citation from Boris Frumkin. He's currently a leader of Oleg Lundstrom Orchestra in Moscow. But in Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival, he was with his quartet, Crescendo, or KM Quartet. I was lucky to meet him in Moscow a couple of times. We had really lot of time to talk about jazz and his own life and the festival. And he pronounced a really wonderful saying, which sounds in Russian, "Всё было так, но не так, всё было и так было." It concerns, first of all, the life in Soviet Union. Like, I don't think the translation is actually the best, but here it is. Everything was like that, but not everything was like that. It was also that way. So I think it perfectly exemplifies the situation of jazz, where the dualistic categories true, false, good, bad, correct, incorrect, forbidden, allowed have little explanatory power. But not only, of course, the saying is great not only on jazz, but the life in Soviet Union in general. So thank you. That's all from my part.
Heli, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, especially for me, because I also write about jazz in Lithuania during the Soviet time. So have we questions from the audience or from chat? Yeah, I have one questions. For us, Lithuanian, this festival is very important because Vyacheslav Ganelin was recognized during this festival as the winner of this jazz festival, and Willis Conover, a long-time author of the American Voice show Jazz Hour, dedicated one show to Ganelin's music. And for me, interesting, do you know, or is it possible to find some photos or videos from this festival? And of course, this festival was in the spotlight of the KGB, so maybe there is some ways to find some documentation of this festival.
On Tallinn 67 festival?
Yeah.
As I said, I completed a book recently on the subject. By the way, the book includes also interviews with Lithuanian musicians Vyacheslav Ganelin and Oleg Molokoyedov. So I'd like to thank Ruta Skudiene, who helped me to make a contact with all those people. So yeah, there are a huge amount of photographs on this event. I think even online you can find them, but most of them are in Estonian archives. In the archives of Estonian theatre and music, then Tallinn City Archive, the National Archive. So yeah, there are a lot of it's very well captured event in general.
Okay, thank you, Heli. We have one question from Andrzej Mondro. Thank you for a great presentation. There is also a myth of 1960s jazz in Poland, especially free jazz, which is considered the first in Europe. Was there any awareness of Polish jazz in Estonia at that time?
Thank you for a question. I didn't mention it, but Namoslavski's group attended the Tallinn 67 Jazz Festival. It's difficult to say how much awareness Estonians had during this time on Polish jazz, particularly. I think the Jazz Forum, the Polish jazz journal, circulated definitely around Estonian jazz fans, and Walter Ojakävi, jazz broadcaster and the author of Estonian jazz history, yeah, definitely used the material from this journal in his broadcasts. But yes, Namoslavski was in Tallinn in 1967, first Polish group visiting Estonia.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So, no questions. So, Heli, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we will have a break, and we will meet to another session after 30 minutes.
Hello everyone again. We are back from coffee break, and we start the last session of this conference, but it's not the last event. The last event will be after the lunch, keynote lecture by Olga Manulkina. And now we'll have 3 presentations by 3 Lithuanian musicologists. Quite different, but very interesting and intriguing presentations. And the first one is a provocative report by Lina Navickaitė-Martinelli, Lina is a full-time professor at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre, and as well she is the initiator of artistic studies in our academy. And her main focus on in her research is this field of artistic performance. And I think this presentation is about it as well. So please, Lina.
Partly, yes. Thank you, Rima. Hello, everyone, both here in the hall and those who are following us online. As Rima said, my paper is slightly provocative. Yes, I have to admit that I had a temptation to call it a decline rather than a change. But well, let us see what is it all about. Complex political, social, and cultural processes took place in the 1990s, which bore the fruit of a liberated musical expression on many levels. The cultural change that my paper attempts to explore is related to a genre of classical crossover, which surrounds us nowadays and which became a particularly influential means for classical musicians to gain a wider appeal during the period under discussion. Briefly about the subject itself. Classical crossover broadly encompasses both classical music that has become popularized and a wide variety of popular music forms performed in a classical manner or by classical artists. Also, the phenomenon of collaborations between classical and popular performers, as well as music blending elements of classical genres with those of popular music, or attempts to bridge Western music and other cultures, has been long known. The term classical crossover was coined by the record companies in the 1980s, and it gained particular popularity exactly in the 90s. A popular pioneering figure in classical crossover was classically trained tenor and film star Mario Lanza, although the term crossover did not yet exist at the time of his greatest popularity in the 1950s. Arguably, another early pioneer of crossover was the 20th century composer Kurt Weill. A writer of avant-garde serious music, his collaborations with the playwright Bertolt Brecht on projects such as the Three Penny Opera nevertheless gave an early indication of his interest in writing in an easily accessible, popular musical style. However, what I consider a real landmark that laid the foundations for the modern flourishing of classical crossover was the first concert of the three tenors, Luciano Pavarotti, José Carreras, and Plácido Domingo, held in 1990. Their repertoire and shows brought a combination of opera, Neapolitan folk song, musical theater, and pop to a vast television audience and later to full arenas. To talk on the later stars of the genre, the Italian pop tenor Andrea Bocelli, who is the biggest selling star in the history of classical music, has been described as the king of classical crossover. Similarly to his female counterpart, the British soprano Sarah Brightman, who has released albums of classical, folk, pop music, and musical theater. Particularly during the last decade of the 20th century and on, hybridization of many spheres of culture and art, mutual interdependence of their various forms and expressive means, produced a system of mass communication that aims at demolishing the artistic and stylistic boundaries. According to researchers in the field, the primary purpose of classical crossover music is to appeal to a wider audience than the original version of music. According to EMA Classics, the classical music market mainly targets female groups of 35 years plus and older supporters. Conversely, classical crossover music market targets a wider variety of audiences, from younger generations to those over the age of 50. So what makes the classical crossover industry more marketable? To put it simply, various traditional classical artists focus primarily on the music, their talents, and long years of training their techniques. Many of classical crossover artists, in addition to their musical skills, which quite often are pretty much remarkable, they put a clear focus on their distinctiveness in appearance, performance behavior, and dress code to appeal to the audience. In other words, the artists have to be a complete marketable package. Before proceeding, let us watch a brief excerpt from the promotional video of a young Lithuanian contemporary music ensemble, New Ideas Chamber Orchestra. Telling are the keywords appearing in this video: ethereal and energetic musical experience, so accessible and entertaining, classical music equivalent of rock stars. This orchestra of skillful young musicians is mainly playing the minimalist music of their founder, composer Gediminas Gelgotas, which is in itself perhaps more appealing to broader audiences than to art music lovers. However, even when they play the music by other authors or epochs, the emphasis is always exactly on these previously mentioned emotion-appealing aspects of playing and other elements of the marketable package: dress codes, makeup, and overly gesturalized stage behavior. In fact, it is precisely the gestural communication that is of particular interest for me in making this research. In the literature on human movement, the term gesture is used to describe a body movement that carries meaning. As Laura Bishop and Werner Goebel put it, I quote, "A movement does not have to produce a meaningful outcome, such as a sounded word or tone, to constitute a gesture, though sound-producing movements are gestures as well. Rather, it is the movement itself that is meaningful. The musical gestures used in performance include facial expressions, body sway, and head nods, as well as sound-producing movements like the drop of a hand onto piano keys or the sweep of a bow across violin strings. At the same time, movement is tied to music perception just as it is tied to music production. I quote, when we experience another person's performance, we hear the sounds that result from the person's movements. Our perception of expression of the sounded performance is shaped by the type and quality of the movements used. Our perceptions of performance expression also depend on whether we can see as well as hear the musicians playing. Musicians' body movements, even those movements not directly involved in sound production, communicate a great deal of information," end quote. The importance of musicians' facial expressions and bodily movements in communicating emotions in music has been widely acknowledged. It is important to note that characteristic bodily responses of a performer may be discussed as determined, firstly, by the capabilities and limitations of the performer's individual body, but also by the sort of behavioral codes, pre-established societal manners, the sets of norms and standards that exist in concert practices of Western musical performance. According to Alan P. Merriam, as there are specific kinds of physical behavior concerned with the manipulation of voice and instruments, there also seem to be characteristic bodily attitudes, postures, and tensions, and it is possible that such bodily characteristics can be correlated with other behavioral elements to reveal significant facts about music making, end quote. A wish to reach out to wider audiences, add up to accessibility and popularity of art music, and to build bridges between musical genres leads today's classical musicians to a variety of crossover collaborations with the colleagues from other genres, or venturing alone at what may be perceived as popular music. In doing so, that is, when trying to appropriate the codes from another cultural universe, certain and sometimes rather significant adaptation and transformation of professional habits happens on several levels of musicianship. For the more empirical side of this paper, let us see what direction some art music performers take in their attitude towards gestural messages of music making. As the first example, I would like to show part of the video footage from the live performances of 3 singles for the album Barcelona, where Freddie Mercury and Montserrat Caballé sing together, which remains one of the charming examples of how the two areas merge not only in musical terms, but also in terms of physicality, appearance, and behavioral codes of performers, from voice formation to dressing to facial expressions. And how does one style follow another, borrows and or benefits from it?
The boy had a way with words he sang, he moved with grace, he entertained. So naturally, no gesture out of place, his road in life was clearly drawn. He didn't hesitate, he played, they saw, he conquered as the master of his fate.
So we could see as a solemn entrance, the tension to the audience, each in their own element. We see operatic acting from Caballé's side. We see Freddie restricted by the tuxedo, so unusual to him. Their voices match because that's what Mercury was aiming at while composing the piece. Caballé uses glissandi of the voice, which definitely is not her natural element, and she's trying to adapt to the gospel movements. This, as you may suspect, was for me an example of the classical crossover where the cultural hybridization was at its best, with the respectful and appropriate merging of different worlds of music. I could not always say the same about my further examples. The Croatian cellist Stjepan Hauser started his early career as a promising classical cello music player, and he was very successful also there, winner of competitions, collaborator with major orchestras and musicians. Eventually, a cello duo with his friend Luka Šulić called Two Cellos was formed. Their aim, together with their personal branding, was all directed towards bringing a new and a young audience to classical music concerts. As it often happens, Hauser, as a more charismatic or a more determined part of the duo, continued his goals by making new collaborations or solo initiatives. Hauser's classical crossover music gives the audience a new spin on classical music. This kind of music is more casual, approachable, and it does not require audiences to have formal classical concert etiquettes. The slide you're watching now demonstrates the attention of this new and young audience towards his professional life. The Google search first suggests Hauser wife and then Hauser cello. Let us begin by the most sober video Hauser can offer. Him and another YouTube star, pianist Lola Astanova, are performing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Sexy entrance, we see an unnatural sitting too far from the piano, sitting on one chair to emphasize the closeness of the performers and their immersion into music. Slightly later there, Lola looks like a movie actor who is trying to act the pianist, because no real musician would ever look like that. To compare real and understated chemistry between, say, Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper when performing Shallow, also on one bench at the piano during the Oscar ceremony, could be mentioned, because the point here is that the classical crossover artists, they're trying to adopt certain movements they perceive as being more open and more pop culture, yet the proper popular culture actually has it at a much more natural way. Now, the Moonlight Sonata performed by Lola and Hauser features not so much the change in music structural or score-based properties, let alone the arrangement. It is mostly disturbing on interpretational, extra-musical level. Now, this kind of performance is incredibly popular with audiences, as evidenced by the number of the YouTube views. We have over 38 million views on the couple, as compared to only 7 million gathered by Wilhelm Kempf. The latter performance is published in 2006, while Hauser and Lola are there only since 2 years ago. With such popularity, why remaining in the realm of classical music only? Let us remember the late Freddie Mercury again, and here we have Lola and Hauser interpreting the Queen's song, We Are the Champions. Sorry, I just would like to show you the very end of this video because it basically beats anything I've ever seen. Do you like the moving piano in the video? I think this is superb. So scholars into performance gestures and their perception, Davidson and Correa, offer a classification of performance movements and gestures according to identifiable functions that can be purely biomechanical, culturally learned, technically necessary, or used for expressive purposes. It seems to me Ms. Astanova here breaks any biomechanical necessity, and as for culturally learned, we may of course argue. All what's left is the sheer act of displaying technical perfection plus the enormous amount of attention to the expressive gesturality. I have mentioned before a piece of statistics claiming that classical music appeals to female listeners over 35 years old. Here's the solo concert by Stefan Hauser, and the performance I would like you to suffer together with me is the Waltz by Dmitri Shostakovich. I invite you to pay attention in this last example of mine to what sort of audience is actually attending Hauser's concerts nowadays. Perhaps don't even have to mention the outrageous bowing, all his movements and facial expressions that have nothing to do with the music. The crowd cheering while the performer waving with the bow and dancing with his cello. Well, this is really something quite special. So to conclude, as this paper only began to demonstrate, there have been numerous attempts to employ a variety of bodily codes borrowed from popular culture cliches, among which one may mention the increased quota of energy, unchained emotionality, unchained bodily postures and outfits, as well as overly sexualized image of performance. It is thus of research interest how and if the performers can manipulate and affect the whole process of communication and perception by using their bodily movements, stage postures, and facial expressions as a means of conveying the message of emotionality, virtuosity, and accessibility to new audiences. I would like to finish this talk with some open questions concerning this cultural change. In what ways classical musicians adopt gestural vocabulary of popular culture? How does this vocabulary, including explicit sexualization of stage behavior, affect the audience's perception of the performer's musicianship, virtuosity, and emotiveness? Can a performer's bodily behavior assume a role of facilitating audiences' experience of previously not so familiar musical genres? Finally, is there any hope that after being served such enormous amounts of kitsch, those audiences shall turn to the realm of a more sober classical music? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lina, for this, as I told you in the beginning, provocative report. All the audience is here, live audience is welcome to ask the questions, as well as online audience. I would like to ask the questions in chat. Please write your questions, and we have some minutes for the discussion. So, as firstly, I want only to make some comment. Looking at all these videos, all these examples, I started thinking about classical pianists who also make gestures. Their body codes are also very obvious, but somehow it seems natural, not artificial. And for example, looking how Vladimir Horowitz enters the stage, how he moves, how he smiles, how he looks at the audience, it seems very natural. But also he uses lots of gestures while walking, also while playing. But it's absolutely different what we see here. And here I would say it's like for promotion, probably for not seems natural. It seems absolutely artificial.
Yes, that is the point. Thank you. It is my deepest conviction that the performer's gestures communicate a great deal of their aesthetic preferences, of their personality. So any performer, any classical or pop or rock or folk performer, they have their own immanent gesturality, which adds up to how we perceive their performances. You mentioned Vladimir Horowitz, we can mention Lang Lang, we can mention a lot of other musicians who have very specific gesturality. We can go also to the other side of those who have a lesser than usually gesturality, such as Radu Lupu or Grigori Sokolov. Yes. Their very still performances also add up to how we perceive them. But yes, very interestingly, when classical musicians try to adopt the codes and these emotional signals, let's say, from the other culture, it seems that actually they're just not able to do it in any possibly appropriate manner, besides Caballé.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Are there any questions from the audience before we switch to online? Yes. So I would like to ask you, Lina, to forward you some questions from the chat. And firstly, some comments or how to say, what the online listeners write about looking at this presentation. Shockingly interesting, hilarious, fascinating talk. Yeah, it's material for the history of music lectures. And now, here are the questions. John Van der Wert, our very good listener all 3 days.
I would be upset if there was no comment by John.
Yes, yes. So here is the question by John. Should classical crossover audiences be subjected to being dumbed down? Is this even a good thing, classical crossovers? As a former opera singer, I do not consider Andrea Bocelli an opera singer. Would you consider Andrea Rieu a conductor by this crossover sentiment?
Oh, Jesus, don't remind me of Andrei. No, that's somebody whom I wanted to avoid during this talk, yes, because that's yet a different direction. Actually, somebody who's aiming probably not for younger audiences, but for older audiences who were not previously into classical music. As an intention, this is a very noble thing. But at this point, seeing all the possible results that we can gather on so many YouTube channels, I would probably try to stick to popular culture on one side, classical culture on another side, until they really manage to do it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One more comment and question by Julian Helaby. Although not strictly a crossover artist, Lang Lang is often criticized for his face pulling. How musically embedded do you think his gesturality is? Great presentation.
Thanks, Julian. Lovely to see you. I think that, well, to begin with, Lang Lang's facial expressions and his gesturality have been changing with the time, as you perfectly know. He started as a young musician. He was extremely known for that side of his performances as well, which are now much more sober, if we may say so. Having said that, having been observing Lang Lang's performances quite closely and trying to analyze them, I think that his expressions and his gestures are totally in accordance to the music. That's how he feels the music. That's how he wants to add to the communicational messages, to the emotional message, to communication of that music. I would not probably want to accuse Lang Lang of overdoing something just for the sake of overdoing, as we can clearly see in these two last crossover artists that I've been showing here.
As we have to move on, I would like to forward one more question as the final question for Lina's presentation. It's by Yanis Kudinch, who would like to ask some comment on the crossover tendency until the 80s. Didn't a denomination exist before the 80s about crossover tendency?
Yes, for sure. The crossover was there already, perhaps, well, the whole 20th century for sure. It's been also before the tendency to appropriate other cultures, to hybridize the cultures. Well, you know, Debussy's Gamelan is also a cultural appropriation and a sort of crossover, if we want. What I meant as a landmark of the 90s and 80s was simply the term coined. So before that, it was not considered a crossover, although the very genre itself, of course, it existed with many fine examples.
Thank you, Lina, for your presentation. Thank you for this provocation. And now I would like to invite our second presenter, Aušra Strazdaitė-Ziberkienė. She will talk about Lithuanian Contemporary Music Festival Arti that already will celebrate 25 years of existence, of organizing. And Aušra Strazdaitė-Ziberkienė, she is a musicologist and works in the museum in Kaunas City Museum. Also, she has prepared her doctoral thesis, and in the upcoming months, she is going to make a defense for her doctoral thesis. And now we will listen to the report titled International Festival of Contemporary Music, Arti, Long-Lived Phenomenon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for introduction of Rima, and it's difficult to talk about so amazing paper of Lina Navickaitė. So What are the ingredients of a good festival? It is an energetic and well-educated art director with good musical taste and a good team. Is also a favorable local attitude and circumstances, also by audience and money. Unfortunate, but the pandemic situation must also be considered today. But what if we talk about contemporary music festival? Kaunas Festival iš arti is an event of November, which means that concerts always take place on dark, often cold and rainy evenings. In addition, it is contemporary music festival, but in Lithuania ends the cycle of contemporary music festivals at the end of the year. The organizer of the festival declared that the festival iš arti is, I quote, the only international festival of contemporary academic music in central Lithuania. End of quote. It is mean not in capital, but in second or third largest city in Lithuania. Organizers, I quote, the appearance of the iš arti festival in 1997 was conditioned by desire to promote the works of Kaunas city composers, to promote regional connection of Lithuanian musicians. Gradually, the festival grew from the modest event into a solid showcase of contemporary music, where every year new and old music, symphonies, dances, psalms, concerts, rhapsodies, suites, conversation, and history lessons spread in a similar and different way. The current idea of the iš arti festival is to get to know and compare our countries' world music processes, direction and current event in which Lithuanian and foreign composers of all generations and a large group of performance merge. The festival iš arti is not limited to light music for a narrow group of specialists. It seeks closeness with the listeners, creators, and performers, constantly seeks connection with audience of all ages and educations, shapes and expands the taste of contemporary music users. End of quote. There are several contemporary music festivals in Lithuania. Druskomanija, Gaida, Jauna muzika, Marių klavyrai, Muzikos ruduo. Since its inception, the Kaunas Contemporary Music Festival iš arti has been organized by 3 art directors, composers, members of Kaunas branch of the Lithuanian Composers Union, Dalia Kairaitytė, Vidmantas Bartulis, and Zita Bružaitė. Dalia Kairaitytė organized the festival for the first 4 years, from 1997 to 2000. Vidmantas Bartulis led from 2001 to 2007, and the last years from 2008 led Zita Bružaitė. Festival iš arti is the most important event of the Kaunas branch. According to composer Dalia Kairaitytė, the first organizer of the iš arti festival, I quote, "The idea of the festival was not something new. The Contemporary Music Festival Gaida has been held in Vilnius since 1991. In 1996, the Pažaislis Music Festival started its flight with excellent classic music program. So Kaunas really needed a festival focused on contemporary music. At the time, I was a chairman of Kaunas branch of the Composer Union. The name of festival, end of quote, sorry. The name of festival also was idea of Dalia Kairaitytė. I quote, "The name of the festival was chosen from several variants. When I was clear what the first festival would take place in 1997 in the fall, I asked the section members to think about a name. Algimantas Kubiliūnas and Zita Bružaitė responded to my request. I offered to support the title iš arti, up close, because it was suitable for my planned concept of the festival, to present the music of nearby Baltic countries, to meet the creators directly, up close, to present the Kaunas audience the largest world of city, very close composers. Most colleagues supported the name. Today we see what the festival has been baptized by its proper name." End of quote. Under Dalia Kairaitytė leadership, the festival was quite modest. The main idea of the festival was to present contemporary music, creators, and performers from nearby country. The initial format was 3 concerts and meeting with composers. In 1997, first years of festival, 3 concerts took place during 3 evenings. The program was published in 3 separate posters where the concert took place in 3 places: Kaunas Artist House, Kaunas Philharmonic, and Kaunas Juozas Gruodis Conservatoire. All concerts were commented by musicologist Birutė Landsbergytė-Cechanavičienė. Dalia Kairytytė remembers, I quote, "Cultural newspaper 7 Day of Art, 7 meno dienos, on November 1997 published my short presentation of the festival iš arti. We have not developed a special concept of the festival. We do not emphasize the pretentious word international. We do not want to limit the direction of future festivals because there is nothing more wonderful but the opportunity to experiment. We dedicate this festival to our city and will try to gather a small audience of new music fans to introduce them to the latest work by Lithuanian and foreign composers. Our goal is new and good music without fireworks and show." End of quote. In the third concert, the Tallinn String Quartet presented 3 generations of Estonian music at the Kaunas Artist House: Rudolf Tobias, Ervo Pärt, Erkki Sventur. In the second concert, the piano duo of Rūta and Zbignevas Ibelhauptai presented works by several Lithuanian authors: Vytautas Barkauskas, Onutė Narbutaitė, Zita Bružaitė, Vytautas Germanavičius, and foreign composers Georgi Ligeti and Leonid Desatnikov. In the third concert, which took place at the Juozas Gruodis Conservatoire, Vilnius Municipality St. Christopher Chamber Orchestra, conducted by Donatas Katkus, together with soloist Regina Maciūtė, violinist Ilona Klusaitė, saxophonist Dainienius Parspaliauskas, Vytautas Labutis, Liudas Mockūnas, and Rividas Paulikas performed Loreta Narvilaitė, Osvaldas Balakauskas, Bronius Kutavičius works. Dalia Kairytytė remembers, I quote, "Why did I start the festival with Estonian music and why there were a lot of Estonians in it? Even the famous composers Lepo Sumera came. It was because in Soviet times we had cultural communication with Belarusians, but not Estonians and Latvians. So we were excited about Estonian music and the festival had to fill this gap." End of quote. The festival of 1998 continued its introduction to the music of the Baltic states, and the festival was named as a Festival of New Music. The first concert of the festival was dedicated to the music of Estonian and Latvian composers. There was a meeting with the Latvian composer Peter Vask. 2 others 2 concerts were dedicated to chamber and symphonic music of Lithuanian composers. In the general context of the festivals, in 1999 and 2000 stand out. I quote Dalia Kairytytė, "It was because in 1999 we did not receive any money from municipalities, and in 2000 just some." End of quote. So in 1999, the festival continued to present the music of Baltic composers. Although there was only 1 concert that year entitled Music of the Baltics Composers, it was performed music of Lithuanian Giedrė Pauliukevičiūtė and Dalia Kairytytė, Latvian Petris Vasks, Estonian Ervo Pärt, and also Swedish Per Gunnar Fredrik de Formere. In 2000, the festival performed 2 concerts, one of which was dedicated to chamber music of Juozas Gruodis Conservatory graduates. In the second concert were performed Lithuanian and Latvian music for chamber orchestra. As Dalia Kairytytė remembers, I quote, "The main sponsor was Department of Culture in Kaunas municipality. It was extremely difficult to find private sponsor at the time, therefore the festival budget was just ridiculously small. Much later, when the festival established itself in the cultural panorama of the city, when it was supported by the Lithuanian Ministry of Culture, there was opportunity to significantly extend the duration of the festival or the program for foreign performance and new works for composers. There was a lot of innovation, experimentation, unexpected artistic connection in the festival programs, but good music remained main aim of the festival until now, both completely new and already tested by time as well." Vidmantas Bartulis led the festival from 2008 to 2007. His concept of the festival was presented by musicologist Rimutė Brilienė in the newspaper 7 Day of Art in 2002. I quote, "According to Vidmantas Bartulis, the festival concept and priorities remained unchanged in the concept of music. Today, such an event is most optimal form for dissemination of new music. After all, when we look closely at contemporary music, we see ourselves and others see us in the concept of today's world." In 2001, the format of 3 concerts was still followed. Most of the works of the festival were premiered of work by Lithuanian authors. The Stockholm Saxophone Quartet also took part in the festival, performing works of Swedish, Romanian, and Lithuanian authors. Since 2002, the festival program has been steadily expanding to include more and more of world music. This tendency was emphasized in the program written by musicologist Lina in the festival program. The festival was surprised with desire to change. Today, it is impossible to search for an identity specific on one nation or one country because the category of identity itself has become universal. Today's creator is an expired artist who spread his individual experience by looking at it ironically rather than sentimentally, using the aesthetic of an interesting game. Such a developer is constantly looking to break free from what he tried yesterday, constantly changing because only chance allows him to break out of a rigorous, previously taught, age-old composition technology. The creator's relation to sound is empirical rather than analytic and very open, allowing a different creative strategy to be implemented each time. Such music, in a broad sense, gives the listener the right to be free, to have their own association, and to be involved in the game of the charm of impossibility, which has called music since ancient time. End of quote. Since this festival began, computer and electronic music concert organized by composer Gergiev, who at the time worked at Kaunas University of Technology and took place in the evenings or at nights. Foreign performance of this festival were China Found Music Workshop from Taiwan, performed composers of Taiwan, and premiere of Vidmantas Bartulis Untinėlis. 6 concerts took place in the festival of 2003. The premieres of Lithuanian author and especially Kaunas residents were presented. The second electronic and computer music concert was performed, and a foreign group, the Penderecki String Quartet from Canada, took part. The concept of festival was described by musicologist Rima at the program book. Looking up close at free, uncompromising contemporary art, we see ourselves and others in the context of today's fast-paced and universal world. Our world in which people seriously or playfully discover cause and effect on conceptuality and abstraction, with sound space of mathematical theories and autonomy of material being. At this festival, a concert of electronic and computer music took place in concert hall of Mikalojus Konstantinas Čiurlionis National Art Museum. The festival of 2004 expanded even further. Concerts were played in Kaunas and Vilnius, sound sculpture exhibition took place, special attention was paid to new project and electroacoustic music. The concept of festival was described by Gergiev in Rimutė Brilienė introduction to the word. It is not a contrast, but a process, not a competition, but cooperation, not a match, but a whole of artistic expression. In the festival played Canadian Ergo Ensemble, Belgians 7, Vermish and Jos Creator at Ebony Quartet. The festival space entered museums, assuredly. The music of the Lithuanian origin composers Paul Dirmeikis from France, performed by the Kaunas String Quartet, was presented at the Čiurlionis National Art Gallery. For the time in museum, a concert of electronic and electroacoustic music took place. Presentation of sound sculpture and performance by Hans van Kolvik from Netherlands took place at Mykolas Žilinskas Gallery. The festival also presented a young generation of composers, students of Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre, now well-known composers: Justė Janulytė, Rūta Vilkauskaitė, Albertas Navickas, Artūras Bumšteinas, Ugnė Giedraitytė, Egidija Medekšaitė, Jonas Jurkūnas, Giedrė Gešuskaitė, and Sigitas Mickis. Festival of 2005 was named as the Jubilee, the 10th. This is a mistake. The jump over the year has accompanied the festival for more than 10 years, and the correct numbering was restored only last year. The program of the festival was even broader, more ambitious. The program provided detailed information about the author's works, performance, photographs, and parallel translation of text in English was started. The axis of this festival, according to the program, was the concert genre. The representative of the festival by Zita Bružaitė, Dalia Kairaitytė, Vidmantas Bartulis, Giedrius Kuprevičius. As always, programs of works by Lithuanian authors was prepared. German composers Bernhard Franke, Odessa Ensemble Harmonies of the World, Japanese musicians participated of the tradition of electroacoustic and audiovisual music was continued and expanded, and concerts were broadcast online. The festival space expanded even more. Concerts took place in various concert spaces of Kaunas and Vilnius and in the space of Čiurlionis Gallery. Pianist and composer Hideki Kozakura has given a lecture on Japanese contemporary music in Kaunas, Sugiharagaus House and Vilnius. The sound of Japanese music was presented at Kaunas Mykolas Žilinskas Art Gallery of traditional Japanese folk instrument, which performed not only the composition of Japanese authors, but also Vytautas Germanavičius. The concert of works by Bernhard Franke, Germany, performed at the Mikalojaus Konstantinas Čiurlionis Gallery. The Ukrainian Ensemble Harmonies of the World piano quintet has performed in 3 places, at the Kaunas Artist House, at the Ukrainian Embassy in Vilnius, and in Trakai, in program with chamber music, Ukrainian and Lithuanian composers. The festival paid special attention to electronic music. San Francisco Computer Music Alliance and Kaunas String Quartet performed at Kaunas and in Vilnius. The festival of 2006 focused on chamber genres. We presented 17 premieres of Lithuanian authors. At the festival played various Vilnius concert group. Also foreign gave concert. The Dutch quartet Amstel and Argentina Fronteras del Silencio. The concert also were broadcast online by KTU. The concert took place in spaces of Mikalojaus Konstantinas Čiurlionis Museum, Mykolas Žilinskas Gallery and Čiurlionis Gallery, Vilnius Vytautas Magnus University Hall, and Kaunas Garrison Offers Club building. There was a lot of Lithuanian music in this festival. Traditionally, Čiurlionis Gallery hosted concert of electronic and electroacoustic music by Giedrius Kuprevičius and Paulius Sluškonis. The festival of 2007 was the last to be hosted by Vidmantas Bartulis. The festival program states, I quote Birutė Brilienė, "Our festival has its face, no matter what the skeptic says. If we look closely, we see in this face reflection of globalization and multiculturalism, the consequences of intermittent experience with the latest technologies, wrinkling smiles and wrinklings left by melancholic nostalgia. The head of freedoms of expression bursts into his autumn cheeks, and in his gaze, the fire of the desire for innovation and unpredictable solution." End of quote. According to Vidmantas Bartulis, I quote, "A common trend characteristic of almost all works in this festival is bright literalness. An implied plot with something acquires intimacy, reflection of feature of a music diary." End of quote. A similar format is maintained. Lithuanian premieres, attention to chamber music, foreign performance, this time only Europeans, electronic music. The new in this festival was exclusive piano music concert performed by Andrius Vasiliauskas. The concert of festival took place in the spaces of Čiurlionis Museum, Kaunas Kultūros Center, and Academy of Music in Kaunas and in Vilnius. The festival continued electronic music nights at the Čiurlionis Museum, where audio electronic acoustic composition by Giedrius Kuprevičius, Antanas Kučinskas, Titas Petrikis, and others were performed. The music of Belgian and European composers was widely presented at this festival by the Belgian ensemble duo Phonics. The concert also featured Vytautas Germanavičius' creation, Le Désir and Improvisation. The Austrian Karl-Heinz Els presented himself somewhat different at the festival, giving a lecture, Strategies of Composing in Real Time. Therefore, this festival is a passion with creative inspiration, themes, composition, method, and tools, styles, and variety of moods, said Mužaitė in 2008. We quote about commercial events, but not about fostering Lithuanian academic music. This must be supported at national level, she said in 2019. Everything is changed. What is contemporary music today, says Zita Bružaitė. The festival of 2008 is the beginning of a long and successful leadership of Zita Bružaitė. Meetings with composers, master classes, conferences were started as part of the festival organized by Zita Bružaitė, and respect for Lithuanian classics and special jubilees was given every year. It is interesting how for the numbering of the festival was mixed, intentionally or unintentionally, when number of a festival was precisely associated with number of the premieres or other things. In the introductory speech of the Bružaitė program, 30 festivals with 30 premieres of Lithuanian composers, 30 hours of listening, 4 works, 8 days of festivals. It was 80 University of Antanas Rekašius and Karlheinz Stockhausen was commemorated. Music of Lithuania, German, Norwegian, Ukrainian, Swiss, Tatarstan, Belgian, Romanian, Russian, French, Italian composers were performed by 135 Lithuanian and 22 foreign performances. I quote, "Therefore, this festival will fit in with its creative inspiration, themes, composition method and tools, styles and variety of moods. This year it will spread new electronic vibration, the ritual background of November's existence, various music, dances, songs, psalms, concert, rhapsodies, arias, suites, conversation, history lesson." End of quote. The 11 event took place in the month. The festival took place in Kaunas and Vilnius in various spaces and settled in the Kaunas Philharmonic and entered the church. 40th International Festival of Contemporary Music is Arti, up close, invite you to listen to the sound, gesture, feels, and experience and the meaning dictated to us by the author's word, and which we will hear and catch ourselves during concert, in small and large halls, open space, and under church walls. End of quote. On the occasion of Lithuanian Millennium, special attention was paid to music inspired by Lithuanian music and composers. Also, festival honored the memory of composers Eduardas Balsys. This festival pays special attention to 2 personalities in meeting with Lithuanian composers Mindaugas Urbaitis and jazz pianist Aleksandr Bliume. In this festival, 50 Lithuanian premieres, time-tested contemporary music. The geography of the festival has been future expanded, not only in Kaunas and Vilnius, also in Marijampolė and Jonava, where performed concert of festival. The meeting with the composers, this time Šarūnas Nakas, took place. The novelty was an international conference of musical performance and interpretation organized by musicologist Darius Kučinskas in Čiurlionis Museum. In conference was presented paper of George Kenaway, Yuri Šutko, Simonetta Sargenti, Dario Martinelli, Lina Navickaitė-Martinelli, and Darius Kučinskas. There was a lot of Lithuanian music at this festival. For the first time in festival, the work of Kaunas composers for bells, Karillion, were performed by Giedrius Kuprevičius and Julius Vilnonis in Kaunas Karillion. The special program Strange Even, based on the work of Edwin Geist, was prepared by Verena Rein, soprano, and the string quartet Hordos, also presented at Festival Muzikos Ruduo. The program combining works by Lithuanian Daiva Rokaitė, Algirdas Martinaitis, Jewish Anatolijus Shenderovas, Edwin Geist, and Arno Nedel, and German Paul Handeman, composer for voice and string quartet. A special part of the concert was the work of Edwin Geist, a German composer, conductor, and pedagogues who settled in Kaunas since the persecution of the Nazis and wrote about Lithuanian music. He was shot in Lithuania during the war. And I skipped some slides. About 2020, festival program was expanded very much and presented not even Lithuanian but European and music of Orient or South Africa, South America. And I would And last year's was a beautiful concert with beautiful presentations. And what Zita Bružaitė said about his all works. Since this year, composer Zita Bružaitė has handed over the festival to young hands, heritage manager Adriana on the bottom, and new member of Kaunas branch composer Viltė Žakevičiūtė on the top. Adriana Filinaitė says, the festival occupies a special place in my life since 2013. Viltė Žakevičiūtė says, I quote, "Iš arti has become closer to me in the last few years, probably when I perceived myself as a composer. I attended the festival not consistently, really, probably due to a relative fast speed of life and a desire to enjoy peace in the evenings. But it is Kaunas festival. Great and gratifying. I think one thing what is missing in bigger advertising and what I really do not like is shooting, how good and fun it is with us. But it is necessary. Maybe not this year, maybe in a few years, where there will be clear strategy to allow the festival to expand future and be heard even more." And just one quote. And asked Bružaitė about the personal reflection about festivalius iš arti. She answered pointing in history, people, creativity, context, adventures, and nights. By the way, this answer was written yesterday, so it's very fresh. I quote, I cannot put it in few sentences for more than 10 years, not at all. Here, like transferring the context of the closet to 2 drawers, especially from 4 angles: the organizer, the composer, the listener, and simply the person who adores music. What subtopic could I use for a reflection? History. Where did it start and where did it end? People, authors, performance, the community attending the festival and supporting it every year. Creativity, of course, the premiere, including my context, not just the piece, but everything around its program. Adventures, 76 emails from one band before concert. Overnight stays, after concert premieres, with guests, with friends and family, long conversation about concert premieres and not only. All this and more makes up the life of the festival, before, through, after. It is a wheel, what is not easy to stop and turn it, and if that happens, its reflection will still to fail for someone. End of quote. And perhaps best reflection was written to me, perhaps most charismatic Kaunas composers and carillon player Giedrius Kuprevičius. His reflection is word game with word arti. The different meaning is obtained, pronounced differently, arti closer and arti to till, to cultivate. I quote, "Iš arti plows our creative souls and brings closer the audience, which is far from present searchers of music, a new and vibrant batch of our works every year. But mutual closeness is an inseparable guarantee of creative motivation, without which all of our work would become only a mirage of artifacts drowned in the fog." End of quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Aušra, for your presentation. And while the audience is preparing the questions, I would like to thank for this comprehensive, detailed overview of all the years. It's due to the time restriction, we didn't follow the last years, but as I see, already starting with the first year, Bartulis, when he started to lead the festival, his open-mindedness and his overview especially enlarged and enriched the program of the festival, comparing to the first years when dominating Lithuanian music was only a little bit fulfilled with Latvian, with the Estonian, yes, or other music from other countries, but they were only sporadic, so mainly Lithuanian. And starting with Bartulis, we see that it's really a panorama of the world, yes, all over the world. And you mentioned in your speech that world music was included, but I suppose you meant that music by foreign composers, but not world music style.
No, not yeah, world music, but wide world. I mean, yes, Japan, China,
by composers from all over the world, yes. So, are there questions from the audience? Ruta Stanevičiūtė would like to ask.
Yes, thank you very much. It was interesting to have memories about these festivals and to see this panorama. I have one comment, one question. My comment is about exactly the changes in festival programming policies under directorship of Vidmantas Bartulis. I don't know if you know, but most of international concerts, international programs of that time was based on collaboration with a Lithuanian section of International Society of Contemporary Music. So that's and selection and also even expansion to Vilnius was due to that fact. Yes. But my question is related not to the programming, but to audiences, because each festival is a formative institution, which influences greatly not only national hierarchies and canons of composers and the images of international music, but also it educates the audiences, and also it's at the same time influenced by local audiences, by their preferences and tastes. May you comment a little bit Kaunas audiences for contemporary music, the preferences, probably which concerts or which programs received the biggest success in Kaunas?
Well, the biggest success is usually for symphonic music. Everybody like age-tasted music, perhaps. And if a program were like Ravel or somebody, it probably will be biggest audience. But chamber music, what I like at most, is usually is performed in small chamber of philharmonic, not at big hall, but in chamber, and it's not so many audience. It is very shame and pity, but because of good quality of chamber music was performed in Arti Festival. And another side, but Bružaitė tried to do concerts in different places. For example, shopping centers, even or in street. To give audience opportunity to listen this contemporary music, but today, what she said, maybe is not necessary, because also cause expansion of money in festival. So philharmonic space is maybe best and good.
Thank you, Aušra. Thank you for your presentation. We move forward to the third report, and now it's an honor to present our musicologist, Professor Gražina Daunoravičienė. I'm very happy that I studied under Gražina's supervision. Today, Gražina Daunoravičienė will talk about typologizing look at the last 3 decades of Lithuanian music development. Gražina Daunoravičienė is a full-time professor at Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre. She made, in 2008, she implemented habilitation in musicology. And she is the founder, and for 20 years she was the chief editor of Lithuanian scholarly journal Lithuanian Musicology. Also, Gražina Daunoravičienė is initiator of many musicological projects in Lithuania. She is author of various monographs and article collections, editor of article collections, and now Professor is ready to make her report.
Dear colleagues, as argued by Wolfgang Marx, He is an author of Classification und Gattungsbegriff in der Musikwissenschaft. In English, it's Classification and Genre Term in Musicology. It is monograph published in 2004. One of the most comprehensive monographs on the subject of music genre. One quotation: genre is a widely ignored aspect of musical studies. I tend to agree with Marx. However, in the field of research, I shall to try resurrect a category of music typology, weakly functioning in theoretical discourse. I chose the current theoretical perspective not only to express confidence in that universal, but also due to its conceptualizing capacity. After all, it specifically brings together various focuses of art, crosses theoretical models, and can predict, thanks to synergy of social and artistic aspects, the proposed typological approach overcomes the fear of the actualization of the outdated phenomenon and fragmentation of research, and goes beyond the limitation and urgent issue in musicology. One cannot ignore the fact that the change in the world, as well as Lithuanian music in the late 20th and the first decades of the 21st century, has now been reflected in the concept of typology and creative products. The search for a new concept of typological phenomena is also encouraged by the headlines of musical works of the young generation of Lithuanian composers in the second decades of the 21st century. That is, the art of sound, or in German, Klangkunst, according to Helge Haber, electronic music, electroacoustic music, computer music, acousmatic music, multimedia, performance, conceptual music, happenings, video installation, sound sculpture, experimental music, interactive sound installation, interdisciplinary music, etc. At the same time, several universal traits of art creator are emerging. Composer or artist is becoming increasingly universal person, mastering the tools, not creative technologies, typical of different arts. In the creative processes, he collaborates with artists from different areas. New opera are created by international teams, and the compositions themselves stand out from their visual and performative nature and the synthesis of different technical media. Similar processes take place in composers' workshops and music scenes in most countries. A critical discourse of such creation is impossible without an epistemological approach to the tradition of typologization of artistic artifacts. For the studies of art, music, type, transformation in the framework of at least 6 decades, starting with the 60s of 20th century, a chart of the Fluxus representative Dick Higgins, which summarized the products of Fluxus artistic campaigns, is of great importance. Higgins called it the concept intermedia. You know, inter is between, media means of communication, and this intermedia, which in his environment was perceived as a label of experimental cross-sectoral campaigns, often synonymized with the Fluxus movement itself. The intermediate chart, published in 1965, visualized the sketch of the genealogy of new art kinds or types and captured the totality of new multimedia artifacts. As we can see, the chart included Henry Flynn's conceptual art, performance, intermedia, happenings, musical sculpture, combines mail art, installation, crystallizing from fluxus events, and actions, as well as other products of synthesis of experimental music, dance, literature, theater, music, and action. The catalogue of new art forms, of genres, of the fluxus era spoke in the expressive language of the graphics of Higgins intermedia. Its reading may propose the following insights formulated by Hannah Higgins. First, the size, you can see different sizes, yes. The size of the circles in the chart is likely to have reflected Higgins' view of the prevalence of one or other genotype in the 60s field of arts. Second, overlapping circles apparently visualized permanent intersections of differentiated genotypes within the system. And third, the rhetoric of the circles unnamed by Higgins is also significant. The questions mark undoubtedly reflected Higgins' belief that in the creative, energetic milieu, new arts form or genres were to emerge soon. Higgins' chart helps to explain the creation of Lithuanian music from the a typological viewpoint, as well as the trends that emerged when Lithuania as a state de facto regained independence in 1991. I shall briefly present the framework of concepts used in the current presentation. From the most general viewpoint of art criticism, the genre of music in this presentation shall be defined as a genotype of music, the inherited typological commonality of music compositions. The genotype is a part of identity of the products created by individual artistic intelligence, a recursive self-organizing system that pervades the development of music art with its changing actualization. In my opinion, the transit milieu in the change in the genotype macro systems are represented by a specific system of ontic states of musical genotypes. It is formed by the monogenre of the old tradition, the polygenre, the free genre, and the monogenre of the new tradition. In the presentation, I shall present the development of Lithuanian music over the last 3 decades through 3 several examples of the above-mentioned chain of typological stages. Genres of cases of monogenres of the old tradition, opera. Experiments based on the convention of monogenres of the old tradition in Lithuania revealed no lesser potential for creativity than the other above-mentioned stages of genotype as polygenres, free genres, and the new tradition monogenres. 40 Lithuanian operas composed over the course of the 3 decades prepared the young generation of composers for the revision of the opera canon in the 2010s. The general trend in the new Lithuanian opera is critical reinterpretation of the contemporary post-opera, the concept of Helena Novak. A conceptual revision of the opera canon was provoked by young composer Rita Mačiuliūnaitė, her Nana opera, Dress Code. Its multidimensional reduction of the verbal and musical text in terms of duration surprised the well-known precedents of miniature operas, such as Darius Milhaud's Deliverance, the 1928 in years recording lasted just over 7 minutes. And Peter Reynolds' opera, Sons of Time, included in the Guinness Book of World Records. It lasted just 3 minutes and 34 seconds. Marčiuliūnaitės nano opera consists from 61 bars only, and it lasted only 2 minutes and 40 seconds, is to categorized as typical nanotechnology era opera mutation. The storyline of the opera develops the situation of preparation for going to the opera through solving an issue of man's dress code, choosing the right tie. The dress code action is based on the set of onomatopoeic words of the libretto. No conventional verbal text is used. The perception of the musical process is determined by the intonational and processual commonality of language and music. That is reflected in the nano libretto itself. You see now the libretto of dress code. It is full libretto of this nano opera. And you can see 2 characters, but tape is only as character of woman and clarinet. I show now 61 bars of score. It is all nano opera. Please. 4 characters, clarinetto in B flat, tape. It is as analog of woman character, tenor solo, Raffaele, it is character Raffaele, and baritone solo, it is Don Vito. It is all score of opera. A study of musical evolution and interrelationship of the dress code characters reveals the composers and directors' elaborated consideration of the multidimensional and multi-aspectual management of musical and theatrical elements. The diagram, the correlation of 6 aspects moving from the top and to the top clockwise, it shows this technology of composer, and you can see first, evolution of dramaturgical states of the 4 characters, intonation and punctuation marks of the verbal text in the libretto, dynamic of changes in the musical material and the dramaturgical functions, rhetoric of onomatopoeic words, chords of fifths or triads. It is some symbol of 3 calls in theater, and responses, clicking on stone, moving, singing, and others. To understand how the components work synchronously in the chronological segment of 2 minutes and 40 seconds requires the imagination of the perceiver. I shall emphasize another link between Marčiuliūnaitės nano opera and the research in contemporary nanotechnology. As you know, it is a branch of applied science and technology. Working with nanoparticles experimentally confirmed scientists' insights that the nanoparticle detached from standard material carries completely different properties, often far superior than the large object. Then is supported by the insights from the analysis. They were provoked by the contrast between the 18th century opera, which involved in the worldview of the steam machine invention in 1769 space, and the 21st century nano opera as a cultural product formed by the era of nanotechnology. Multiple compositional programming of the opera nano elements extend the depth of artistic conceptualization of the elements typical of the traditional opera. Now, if you want, I can show this opera, only 2 minutes and 40 seconds, please. Echoes in opera. Clarinetist, another person, character. Thank you. A free genre case in Lithuanian music. An example of the free genre electronic music is represented in my report by Navickaitės orbifolds. Although, as we shall see below, the case of fraught with deeper problems of typologization. This opus was provoked by visual illustration Orbifold, which was published as a visualization of geometric space of neo-Reimannian theory triads, performed by composer and researcher Dmitry Timochko. The circles meant tones, and the points of their intersection represented the diminished seventh chords. As you see, this intersection, it's diminished seven chords. That's one of the goals of Žukaitės Orbifold is striving to create the plastic of sound and extract moving live electronic sound. Should I try to identify the basic keyword of the Orbifold composition philosophy, I applied technology, I would name it by the concept transformation, because first, the conceptual foundation of moving electronic music sound is based on the condition of the meaningful connections. Second, the basic material of Orbifold, that is the concept of triad connection or transformation in the opus, is based on the creatively realized paradigm of the neo-Reimannian theory. It is the idea of triads transformation. And third, the young author of Orbifold, Žukaitė, transforms the analytical NRT system into an individual creative system. And Žukaitė models the frame of the composition by arranging the harmonic supports of the triads, which moving from C major triad in alternative layer and direction by large staircase of major seconds to the meeting in the distance of tritone. This is fifth major. The set layers of triads can be seen in simplified diagrams of basic triads. You can see, yes, from C major, all the process is going to fifth twice. Yes, it's C, do major, C major, and it's absolutely opposite direction. And second time from C other. And it's just a coda. I think it is formed A1 and coda. Could be. However, the basic triads in Žukaitės Orbifoldas are led to each hour directly, skipping intermediate transformation by means of glissando. In the case of Orbifold, the NRT relevant tritone distance principle applies, which is transposed into constructive algorithm, the voice moving tempos. The smaller interval between the tones, the slower the glissando moves, and the larger interval, the faster the moving. You can see that you can see intervals. It is, for example, big interval, do, la, it is big interval, but you can see a small interval. That is, glissando is different. It is very active and not so active. Since those trajectories, Žukaitė worked on the basic of elements. In the MIDI piano roll window or system, she used extremely high pitch bend commands. They enabled the creation of the slow place glissando or very quick glissando. The overall chart of the composition in the spatial coordinate system was presented by composer herself. In blue and red lines indicate two sequences of triads. The x-axis shows the time of the composition and the y shows the triads. You can see it is time, and it in this in the y you can see triads. And if you want, I can to show this music. Yes, picture. procedure. Cases of monogenres of the new tradition. Yes. Monogenres of the new tradition that emerged in the second half of the 20th century advertised the idea of the spontaneity of occurrence of change and order, as well as self-organization of complex systems, formation and deformation. You have seen the precedence of new genres in Dick Higgins' chat. I shall finish my presentation with Marius Čivilis' installation on lead glasses. It is listened and observed by 12 recipients. During the installation, under instruction of the author, the work, all recipients are required to lie with their eyes closed. The rhythmic impulses of the sounding music correlate with the flashes of the LED bulbs, the frequency and intensity. In accordance with the psychological and medical interpretation of the process, the LED light flashes are absorbed and reflected in the retina of the recipient eyes. The listeners and observers of the installation see specific drawings, networks, configuration, fractals, schemes, etc. As one of them testified, quotation, "Sometimes you had a feeling that you were weightless, moving in some different directions, or saw colors, spots of changing shape, and some other things." At the end of quote. In that way, Čivilis, in his installation on lead glasses, constructed and realized the interface of functional structural parts characteristic of works on the art of sounds, Werken der Kunst, Klangkunst in German. From the technological viewpoint, Martin Super described it as reduced three-element interactive system consisting of input, transformation, and output. In German, Eingabe, transformation, and Ausgabe. This installation was performed in Vilnius in the premises of so-called sound sphere. Its genotypic identity is embodied in a characteristic of site-specific character, though it must be characterized by a site-specific character, though it must be acknowledged that it is also valid for performance. Monogenres of the new tradition are characterized by a high level of dialogue between the genotype, attributes, and fill a huge 21st century intergenre creation space. As can be seen, over the last 3 decades, Lithuanian composers have come a long way in compensating for the restriction of free creative development constrained by Soviet ideology. When considering both world and Lithuanian music, from the typological point of view, some epistemological conclusion can be drawn. Composer works on recent decades can be divided into 2 conditional groups. A, those linked to the traditional of the genotype of music, and B, those ignoring and denying it, thus placing the later outside the boundaries of the genotype epistemology. One can recognize that the greatest innovation of category is its disappearance and proclaim the non-universality of genre tradition as incapable of ontically providing new music practices with meaning. And third, one can recognize the status of the type of functioning of the genotype of music in the milieu of compositional practice over the last 6 decades. It was the later solution that the author of this paper chose. Such an angle reveals complex metamorphosis of the genotypic level at attempts to discern the hypothesis of the change in the genre macro systems intuitively felt by researchers, as well as to predict the vision of the future. This approach reflects the consciousness of a pluralistic postmodern culture in the specific typological form and reflects our philosophy of culture. Thank you. Excuse for my language.
Thank you, Gražina Daunoravičienė, for your presentation. And I see already some questions in the chat. I invite audience to think about the questions. First, I would like to make a short comment or somehow to discuss with you about the first example that you provided, dress code by Rita Mačiuliūnaitė. Already during the coffee break, I mentioned that somehow in this nano-opera, anyway, I see the model of this traditional opera. There is the allusion or analogy of overture, these three sounding bells, major chord. Also, we have the analogy of typical aria, the normal operatic voice, 2 voices, 2 male voices. Also, we have some kind of structure in this composition. The bells, they divide into 2 sections, and also there is a final section. So anyway, reduced to the very small amount in time, only nearly 3 minutes, I would say this composition keeps the traditional opera concept. So thinking here, maybe it's not like a transformation, but reduction of the typical genre. I would suggest
yes,
to do here.
It's true, but reduction many levels according to nanotechnology philosophy, I said. And I called this opera as monogenre of old tradition. Of old tradition is from Italian opera, of course, but very, very reduced and very deeply composed, very levels, as you can see, libretto, without any word, only different onomatopoeic figures and very big reduction. It is very, according to philosophy of nanotechnology, it is very interesting, I think. Yes, of course.
I would like to forward a question by Vita Gruodytė. She is asking, can you specify the notion of the genotype? Are you using it in the sense of François Bernard Machet classification, or are you basing yourselves on another theory?
Yes, my philosophy is that genotype, genre, is as biological idea which implemented in art, because it repeated in different works. It is as biological, because genre is concept from in French, yes? It's as biological concept. And as it is genotype of music, this concept is with an idea from biology. It is as implemented this idea in art, and this concept. It is clear or not?
I hope, Vita, for you, Professor, answered your question. Are there any other questions? We are running a little bit out of time. And now I would like to announce the lunch break. We will have a break for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we'll get back at 4 p.m. in Lithuanian Vilnius time. 4 p.m. Yes, for 3 p.m. 30 minutes. I have to check the schedule. 3:30, sorry. So at 3:30 we start the last event of the conference, a keynote lecture by Olga Manulkina. So please come back in 1 hour and 15 minutes. Hello everyone again. And now here we are for the last lecture at the conference, Music and Change Before and After 1990. Today we have a guest from St. Petersburg. It's musicologist Olga Manulkina, who is going to talk about 90s in St. Petersburg, about conductor Valery Gergiev. And I already would like to ask Olga to join us, to prepare her slides and to make this keynote report. Hello, Olga.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Should I speak louder?
Yes.
Good afternoon. I send you greetings from St. Petersburg. And at the same time, like being in the two cities, I'm happy to be with you in Vilnius, as if on the screen. And I'm grateful for it to the organizers of the conference, my dear friends. I would like to ask you permission not to keep all the time my presentation, because I really cannot speak seeing only the not empty, but the screen of the notebook. So I will put it on and off, if you don't mind, and if it's not not against the rules. Is it okay, Rima? Okay, thank you. So I will start with a memory of one beautiful white night in St. Petersburg after graduation ceremony in St. Petersburg University, when I was standing with my colleague, art historian Alexander Stepanov, on the balcony of Bobrinsky Palace, built in 18th century, where our Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences is situated. Looking toward New Holland, an island with recently reconstructed landscape and buildings from 19th century, and over it toward Mariinsky Theater, he said, St. Petersburg is the main thing that Russian culture created. I asked, what about Pushkin to start with? All inclusive, he answered. The idea, I should confess, is shared by many Petersburgers. What is combined with this pride or arrogance, if you like, is the sense of trauma, of loss, and of resentment, a reaction to many losses. In the 20th century, St. Petersburg lost its status of a capital of Russia, lost its original name for the whole Soviet period, lost much of its population in the several waves of migration, in the Stalin terror, in the blockade, of course, and lost its historical appearance in the newest building. Though some of these losses St. Petersburg shares with other Russian cities, and not only Russian cities, the former capital and blockade are our unique features or unique traumas. Soviet writer Sergei Dovlatov wrote, and here I will start to share with you the Leningrad, he wrote, has a torturous complex or the spiritual center, disadvantaged in its administrative rights. A combination of inferiority and superiority makes it quite acrimonious gentleman. He was speaking about city itself. Other losses could combine in the image of the city that virtually disappeared, like in Atlantida, or as the invisible city of Kitish in Rimsky-Korsakov opera. The city that this way became immortal. In his feature about Gergiev in New Yorker in 1998, Alex Ross quoted Anna Akhmatova and her metaphor of St. Petersburg. I will return to you before nightfall, people of Kitish. Kitish, Ross continues, was the destination where she, Anna Akhmatova, imagined for herself after the death, the city of art of the city, the city of art, the city of Pushkin, Petersburg as an immortal construct of mind. All this ran through my mind, that's Alex Ross continues, as I was listening to the Kirov Orchestra that afternoon, the full import of music hit me. It was the stick of the mostly vanished Petersburg world, the cult of Hellenistic paleness, as Joseph Brodsky defined it. That was the feature on Gergiev that Alex Ross wrote after spending more than a month together with Maestra on and off. And apparently, he opened this opera of Rimsky-Korsakov for himself through Gergiev rehearsals and the performances, as did not only many Western listeners, but Russians too, since it was one of the operas Gergiev returned to Mariinsky stage. It is connected with his performance, this opera, and his name, as well as with the name of the opera director that became known since the premiere of this opera, since his production in 2001, when it was staged by Dmitry Chernikov. I just show an emblematical, symbolic first picture, which I, by the way, showed in Vilnius 2 years ago, of the great dessert, the first picture of the opera. In Chernikov's production, Invisible Kitish is the whole pre-revolutionary Russia disappearing under the water of the magic lake. In Akhmatova's and Ross' metaphor, Kitish is St. Petersburg in particular. For my lecture, I have chosen several relevant themes or concepts and images and complexes of my city in order to discuss how Valery Gergiev responded to it, used it, cured it, influenced it, improved it, and what changes he made in the music, cultural, and social scenes of the city. Here are these things. St. Petersburg is a window to Europe, using Alexander Pushkin's words. St. Petersburg is a capital of the empire, former capital, of course. St. Petersburg is a capital with a provincial destiny. It's also a formula coined in the Soviet times. St. Petersburg is a city that disappeared, as I discussed. St. Petersburg as a city of nearly all Russian composers. And finally, of a city of traditions and city of innovations or even revolutions. So that was a sketch of my first character, the city of St. Petersburg. Here is the second character. Enters Valery Gergiev. In 1996, in my second year as a music critic of Kommersant newspaper, St. Petersburg branch of it, I wrote an editorial about Gergiev's appointment by the first Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, an appointment as a director of the whole Mariinsky, both opera and ballet. In the editorial, I summed up Gergiev's heroic deeds in 8 years that he spent in the position of principal conductor of the theater. And I quoted St. Petersburg eminent musicians, professor of St. Petersburg Conservatory, music critic, Leonid Gatke, who compared Gergiev's epoch at Mariinsky Theatre with Peter I's epoch in Russia, in the history of Russia. I'm going to build on this metaphor, though I also understand that it's a bit dangerous, as it implies a picture of pre-Gergiev Kiev's theater as conservative, isolated from the West, backward. And if we're talking about St. Petersburg, it implies that Gergiev created a new metropolis, his theater, on the place where had been nothing but the fair, as well as recreated the image of the real city of St. Petersburg as the opera capital of Russia. Back then, Gatkel was talking only about Mariinsky Theater. Recently, in the documentary of 2016, he said about the city of St. Petersburg as a whole. It, the city, outlived his own death. Its genetic foundation dried out. Before Gergiev's appearance, we were the sort B, though the highest sort B. To discuss Gergiev's impact on the city of St. Petersburg, we need, therefore, to picture the music map of the city in the 70s and 80s, on which Kiev Theater, that regained its original name Mariinsky only in 1992, was not in the center at all. It's actually far from the center geographically too, because, I see that I cannot use my mouse, but if you see the Isaac Cathedral in the center, to the right, you will see is a square of arts, where was the real center of the city and the real center of music life in the city, Great Philharmonic Hall, Small Philharmonic Hall, and the first Philharmonic Orchestra under Evgeny Mravinsky. And far, far from the center to the left, Mariinsky is completely tiny on this map, but you see there the Nicholas Cathedral, and next to it, Mariinsky Theater. So it was far from the center geographically, I repeat, but also far from the music center in the 70s and 80s. It was the second opera next to main opera, second opera in ballet theater in the USSR, giving up to Moscow Bolshoi Theater. And the first opera theater in Leningrad. But in the 80s, even small opera theater did something fresh, more fresh and interesting than Kiev's. Kiev Theater surely was a mandatory point for the tourists, especially foreign tourists coming to USSR in groups. But the repertoire and the level of performance and staging in general hardly was inspiring or even satisfying. And surely that wasn't a place to visit and a subject to discuss, neither for elite, intellectuals, public figures, politicians, etc., nor for much of the professionals. The same Leonid Gatkel, one of the main historians of St. Petersburg music culture, in the book The Theatre Square, published in 1990, in the chapter about Kiev Theatre, with all his enthusiastic tone, names just a couple of interesting, significant, at least noticeable productions in 13 years of Yuri Timirkanov reign at Kiev. Timirkanov was the director and principal conductor of Mariinsky of Kiev before Gergiev. Among them were two Tchaikovsky operas that really became an event, though very traditional. They were perceived as a fresh gulp of the gulp of fresh air. That tells a lot about other repertoire. It should be reminded that, of course, the 80s in Leningrad and USSR in general were the time of waiting for the changes, or changement, quoting the song of Viktor Tsoi. Or, quoting the phrase of Alexei Yurchak, again, used as a title, the phrase that Alexei Yurchak used as a title of his book, it was forever until finished. And then it did finish. And I'm speaking now not about 1985, not about Gorbachev and Perestroika, but about 1988. On 19th of January 1988, Yevgeny Mravinsky died. He had been the principal conductor of Leningrad Philharmonic for 50 years. Yuri Temirkanov took the helm of his orchestra, and for his own position as a principal conductor of Kirov Theatre, 3 candidates competed. The orchestra voted for young, 34 years old, Valery Gergiev. But, of course, it took intervention of the highest official in Leningrad, the first secretary of Communist Party Regional Committee, Yuri Solovyov, to approve the appointment of young conductor. That were tectonic shifts in musical, cultural, and social life of both the theater and the city of Leningrad. And these changes did coincide strikingly with the seismic geopolitical shift of the late 80s. I can't help thinking what would have happened if Mravinsky died earlier, when Gergiev would be, say, 24, as he was when he made his debut at Kyiv, with War and Peace, by the way. Or if Mravinsky, though it's hardly possible, would die later. He was already 85 when he died. And then Temirkanov might have had other plans. To what extent Valery Gergiev was up to the task, and in comparison to what extent he was more suitable for it, I should say, than Yuri Temirkanov, we can understand if we compare the achievements of both of them in the 90s, even in the early 90s. The first, and for a long period, the last thing that Temirkanov did was when he got Mravinsky, famous Mravinsky orchestra in his hands, was to take it on tours abroad. It meant that St. Petersburg listeners would listen to it, to their main orchestra far less, because the orchestra was always absent, and would listen it in the limited repertoire comparing with the repertoire of Mravinsky. Of course, Temirkanov had to deal with financial situation during the first years of Perestroika, but so did Gergiev. And here what he did in a short and selected timeline. Here you see a lot of international debuts and achievements too. But there are festivals, monographic festivals of Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev, and they all took place in St. Petersburg. From the 1993, he founded the festival in St. Petersburg, Stars of White Nights. And more than this, I should say that all these, let's say, contacts and debuts abroad were somehow fruitful for the listeners in St. Petersburg. For example, Gergiev would go to the Met, and then Met would appear on Mariinsky stage. I'll dwell on it a bit later. I should stress that I'm not speaking about Gergiev's musicianship or his way of conducting, so contrasting with Mravinsky conducting, for example, and so powerful when he is conducting his favorite repertoire. My lecture more about him as a public figure, as a director, as a leader. So, if we stretch the metaphor of Peter the First epoch, comparing with Gergiev epoch, it could include some more parallels besides the great deeds and reforms. Of course, one could compare even the image of Gergiev as Peter the First, starting, for example, with the physical appearance. But on serious side of it, and coming to more serious matters of temperament and character, we find under this rubric such qualities as temper, anger, dominating, tyranny. above average conductor's temperament iron, I mean. Combination of these qualities with absolute power is quite a dangerous cocktail. Gergiev's super-intensive schedule is known to the whole world. Alex Ross, in the same long read, commented on one of such gems of opera performance, Sleepless Night, Morning Flight from St. Petersburg to Israel, and then a concert, saying that Gergiev surely has a stamina. Yes, he surely does, indeed. But what about the orchestra players and singers with their fragile instruments, the voices? So to continue this parallel of Peter I, who made his heroic deed in reform, sometimes with a high price paid by his people, I would like to show the dark side of this activity and this intensive schedule on the example of soprano Galina Gorchakova. But first I want to play the clip, I hope it will play the clip, from the beginning of Prokofiev's opera Fiery Angel, premiered in 1991. Excuse me for this. Okay, I don't know what happened. I hope it will not repeat with other examples. So what we see here is Galina Gorchakova is in her, I suppose one of her best and most famous appearances on the stage. This opera, The Fiery Angel by Prokofiev, was a milestone in the new history of Mariinsky and one of the cornerstones of Valery Gergiev epoch in the theater and on Russian and even world music scene. The several contexts for this are Gergiev's passion for Prokofiev, and in this respect, his opera revolution in the repertoire. Then it's revolution in the production on the opera stage, because the opera was staged by David Freeman, and that was the new director's opera, Reggio Opera, which was unknown previously to Mariinsky. And finally, this production was a symbol of reopened window to Europe, because it was internationally recognized and was shown at Covent Garden and recorded by Philips. But there is also a context, the theme, the subject of the voice and career, or I would rather say of the fate of the soprano Galina Gorchakova. in which Fire Angel probably played both positive and negative role, since this is a vivid example of how the career at Mariinsky and collaboration with Gergiev could exhaust the voice. Unlike Olga Borodina, her mezzo-soprano colleague, Galina Korchakova had, as it was said, more technical problems, and the number of the roles, the difficulty of such roles as Renata, and the schedule that demanded stamina resulted in her disappearance from the stage as early as in the late 90s. Brilliant and sadly short career. My memories about the production I kept for nearly 30 years until I could compare them with the recording I found online. Above all, it worked as time machine, reminding me about that unparalleled take-off and courage of the musical scene in St. Petersburg in the 90s. So that was the portrait of my second character of my lecture, Valery Gergiev. And now it's time to start the opera to discuss Gergiev versus St. Petersburg, main themes and images. As you saw in the list of the themes, the first one was a window to Europe. And I do not need to explain in this audience what meant the open borders for the inhabitants of the USSR. St. Petersburg was meant to be, in Alexander Pushkin's word, a window to Europe, and that was the Peter I plan. And that was the city's function and image for the main part of its history. In the first years of Perestroika, the music scene of St. Petersburg probably lost more than gained from the open borders. The new wave of immigration took big numbers of the performers and of philharmonic and opera audience from the city, while the destroyed system of state concert, Goskoncert, didn't bring a lot of famous musicians to the city. It was through Gergiev's unstoppable activity that the city really saw the window open. And again, comparing with Temirkanov, his tours with Leningrad Philharmonic, as well as his own conductor's positions, didn't bring any significant results to St. Petersburg listeners. It was, I dare say, just another product, another item for export. Gergiev, on the other hand, would return himself or with his orchestra with trophies. He would make friends with Plácido Domingo. He would conduct Verdi's Othello in Metropolitan Opera with Plácido Domingo in the title role. And look, the same year, Othello would be produced on Mariinsky stage with Domingo, who will be singing here in St. Petersburg. In 1984, the agreement between Mariinsky and Metropolitan Opera was sealed. And then Metropolitan General Manager Joseph Volpe would give or lend the Kirov its old productions, and the Kirov in return would bring Russian operas to the Met. Gergiev would make friends with La Scala, and in Mariinsky would appear Aida, an old but famous production by Zeffirelli. That was a revolution, or the revolution. Revolution in the opera practice or opera business in Leningrad. And it happened here in Leningrad, in St. Petersburg, not in Moscow, after the decades that our opera stage spent in the shadow of Moscow Bolshoi Theatre. Mariinsky now was not even catching up. It overran its rival, its competitor. And then, in this Zeffirelli production of Aida, the main roles would be sung by the new stars of Mariinsky Theatre, who were making international careers, and about whom it was known that they have an agreement with Gergiev for the engagements abroad, with the condition that they would return for certain planned performances to their native theatre. Olga Borodina, Galina Korchakova, Vladimir Galuzin, later Anna Netrebko, and so on and so forth. The performances abroad themselves also seem to be on a higher level of significance comparing with Temirkanov tours with the same limited repertoire of Russian and Slavic classics. Since Gergiev and Mariinsky presented to the West the Russian operas long or never performed there, making such bold productions of, for example, his favorite Prokofiev as the Fiery Angel, and to establish Rimsky-Korsakov as the composer of several significant operas, and not just Flight of the Bumblebee. So, on the Mariinsky stage in the 90s appeared the Western productions, the Western opera directors, and therefore that was the way for modern Russian opera. The Russian singers already making their careers in Europe and the United States. And finally, last but not least, in Mariinsky stalls and boxes appeared Western opera fans, not the foreign tourists who would visit it by obligation, but the visitors who came specially to listen to Valery Gergiev in his own theater. How could I describe our feelings, my feelings in the Mariinsky at the time, in the mid-90s? That was as if finally the world was not divided by any curtain, iron or nylon, as if we were connected with the opera network in the world behind the borders. And we even could be proud for our plays and statues on this international scene. That was definitely sort A on the international scale. The window to Europe meant also learning Western practices, as Peter I would learn himself and would send noble young men to study in Holland, for example. Thus, Mariinsky, to name just one example, changed the Soviet practice of singing European operas in Russian, leaving it for small opera theatre in St. Petersburg, the second city theatre, as Covent Garden would leave it for English National Opera and Metropolitan for New York City Opera. And the window to Europe meant also learning the rules of good taste and behavior. And that meant also to introduce the repertoire of European opera that had been absent from Kiev stage for nearly all Soviet period. And this absence, result of ideology and censorship, would be a shame for the new Mariinsky. Therefore, before the astonished St. Petersburgers, as well as before Moscow musicians and music lovers and from all over Russia, would appear Richard Strauss' Salome, after 80 years of absence, and Wagner, and white emigrant Stravinsky in Gergiev with his Russian seasons repertoire. Again, that was the evolution. Let's take Wagner example. Wagner music was absent from the theatre experience, if not of oral experience, of several generations. Rare exclusions being the operas from 1840s. My colleagues at the Conservatory at the Department of History of Western Music, experts on Wagner, refused to believe that it could appear on Russian stage in the foreseeable future. And here it was. My review on Parsifal in 1997 was called Wagner at Mariinsky, the Rubicon is crossed. Such a gesture, a bold, risky enterprise, contributed to the image of Gergiev as a fearless winner of new repertoire territories, as revolutionary probably as Wagner himself was. At the same time, it was announced and perceived as reconnecting with pre-revolutionary traditions of performing Wagner. I myself, in my reviews and long reads, reminded the readers that that obsession with Wagner that was in St. Petersburg in the Russian Silver Age, and about first Russian ring staged at Mariinsky in the first years of the 20th century. It was reconnecting with pre-revolutionary Mariinsky and pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg, the one that seemed to disappear. Wagner attracted also special part of opera audience from abroad. Wagner fans from all over the world appeared on Theatre Square, and among them was Stephen Fry. Okay, we'll try again to push the recording, and if it doesn't work, And the second variant doesn't work. I will put it from my computer, not to make problems. Maybe this will work. Oh!
Ooh, look. Sure, I don't have any Russian, but that must be the Russian for ring there, beginning with Kol. So there it is, Richard Wagner's tetralogy, The Ring and the Nibelung. And then the top right, Mariinsky Theatre. It looks gorgeous. Let's go in and see what it's like.
The Mariinsky Theatre has always been a landmark building in Russian cultural life, famous for its opera and ballet. You might be more familiar with the name given to it during the Soviet period, when it was known as the Kirov. They're preparing a new staging of The Ring, masterminded by this man, conductor Valery Gergiev, the Mariinsky's artistic director.
They have those notes. Yes.
There are no horned helmets or Aryan ice maidens on show here. This production is inspired by the myths and legends of Gergiev's homeland, North Ossetia, a reminder that Wagner's work is open to endless reinterpretation.
Wagner actually came to Russia and conducted some orchestral passages from his works, which were in progress and had been produced elsewhere, but some of them for the first time here. The Ride of the Valkyrie, for example, was first heard in Russia. He was paid a princely sum to come and conduct in Russia. And whatever people thought of the music, and many people were affronted and astounded and simply uncomprehending. It was very revolutionary. No one had ever heard anything like it. But whatever people thought of that, they were really impressed by his conducting. He faced with his back to the audience the orchestra. That may seem normal to us, but in its day, that was considered very revolutionary.
I think it will be totally impossible to imagine the history of conducting without a figure like Richard Wagner. Not only because he was the one who decided to turn his back to the audience, which was a revolution, but also to control the orchestra this way and to get so much result from direct eye contact with the musician.
Which is the thing you do as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me? I hope. Again, that was the visit of this visit of Stephen Fry. I would say it was a visit to the former closed country behind the Iron Curtain, to which the famous writer and actor would come for some special interest, and this kind of put the Mariinsky on the same, as I said, level, the same stage, the same scene, and the mastership, let's say, musicianship, and the mastery of Gergiev conducting Wagner was well known even before that. The downside here was these strange, inconsistent decisions of Gergiev, of course, first of all, concerning the staging, quick changes of directors and designers. For example, we had Rheingold in one staging, Valkyrie in another, and Siegfried in Götterdammerung without director at all, because Gergiev decided for another team altogether and another concept, and made himself co-author of that concept together with designer Georgy Tsipin. The process of restoring the former glory of the theatre allowed some historical inaccuracies and expropriation also of the other theatre past. It wasn't Gergiev who invented it, but he accepted it. St. Petersburg, of course, was a city of Italian opera, but the Italian company performed not at Mariinsky, that wasn't built until 1859-60, but across the theater square in Great Stone Theater, Большой Каменный Театр. And it is for this company and theater that Verdi wrote La Forza del Destino. But, as Mariinsky site informs, for more than 2 centuries, the Mariinsky theater has been present and evolved with the plethora of great artists. How could it be, you ask? Because Mariinsky appropriated the past of another theater, of the Russian troupe of this theater, and even of Italian company of this theater. Anyway, the premiere of La Forza del Destino in St. Petersburg version, and with scenery made in 1862 by Russian painter Andreas Roller, was again this reconnecting with another Italian tradition. More problematic and troublesome, to say the least, is the fact that Mariinsky got a music part of the library of direction of Emperor's theaters, and that Gergiev closed it for most of the visitors. But that's completely another story, but though also connected with past. I did not include ballet in my lecture, but at this point I could name just 3 examples of the same logic, the same tradition plus revolution tendency of acquiring of repertoire that cannot be missed, especially if this repertoire is either your own, but forgotten and distorted, like in the case with Sleeping Beauty, that was reconstructed by Sergei Vikharev to more authentic version of Marius Petipa than it was performed for the whole 20th century. Or if it is connected with your theater, at least as a place of exodus, as in the case of Diaghilev repertoire and Balanchine ballets. I will show another example from the Sleeping Beauty, the apotheosis in this reconstructed version. If I were naming the downsides here, I would say that unfortunately now you cannot, and for a long time you haven't been able to see this version, because again, the theater returned to the pasticcio of the Soviet times. As you might guess, with all these productions and premieres, Mariinsky overran Moscow. And here comes another theme of St. Petersburg versus Moscow that includes the theme of St. Petersburg versus Moscow. And it includes the theme of the former capital, or a capital with a provincial destiny. But the traumatic subject, of course, is connected with the complex feelings toward the capital of Moscow and with a long rivalry of 2 cities. As for the Mariinsky Большой rivalry, it is together with the status of capital that Leningrad Theatre lost its superiority. Though it concerns, again, mostly opera, it was painful since all the best singers were recruited by Bolshoi. In the 90s, for some short period, decade or a bit more, St. Petersburg took revenge. All Moscow critics were here in St. Petersburg, coming for a night to listen to Gergiev and to see Salome on stage for the first time in their lives, in most of the cases. In 1998, two theaters organized an exchange, and reviewing the event, I stressed the difference in repertoire politics of the decade. Quote, while Mariinsky landed in Moscow on a flying ship of Wagner tradition, a phantom for Russian stage, I meant here, of course, Flying Dutchman, and cherishing its cosmopolitanism, in the first place, Mariinsky proudly showed there the open window to Europe. What Moscow is apparently proud about is its loyalty to the orthodox and autocracy tradition of Soviet country, as Bolshoi brought to St. Petersburg Iván Susanin in 1945 production. Unquote. From 1993, as I said, every May, June, Gergiev has had his festival Stars of White Nights. I should remind that in 1993, the festival in Russia was still quite new, not a regular thing. I vividly remember the first festivals of contemporary music, for example, Sound Waves, with its piano marathons for 8 hours, and especially International Festival in 1988, to which John Cage himself arrived. Again, it was revolution in mind, of mind. But Gergiev made the biggest and most luxury and most festive and most intensive festival, full of celebrities on the stages and in the hall, literally a movable feast. As to follow all the events, to follow Gergiev himself around the city halls, you had to forget everything else, including sleeping, and if not to become Gergiev, at least to accept his schedule. It is this atmosphere that reminded of glorious Petersburg with its balls, ceremonies, and parades. Gergiev, as a result, became a music symbol of the city, not only of the 20th and 21st centuries, but, as it could be argued, of 19th century, as it's shown in the Russian Ark film by Sakurov. It brings us to the subject of capital of the empire, or of the emperor's theater. I will not touch here the Gergiev's empire, since that was the next decade when he built 2 new buildings next to the old Mariinsky, and it was the 2010s that he built theater in Vladivostok, and it was recently that in St. Petersburg he made future plans for New Holland, for Conservatory, for Count Zubov Palace on the Square, and recently announcing that the building of the main post office is great for the new concert hall, analogous to Albert Hall in London. And I will just briefly touch the painful question of the relations with the emperor. The date when the roaring 90s at Mariinsky finished could be defined maybe not so definitely as Black Thursday on the New York Stock Exchange in 1929. But in my view, it was 11th of March 2000, when Vladimir Putin and Tony Blair watched and listened to Prokofiev's War and Peace from the Tsar box at Mariinsky. Reviewing the event, I wrote, Mariinsky is coming into politic fashion. 3 events of the last month being meeting with Putin in February, visit of the interim president to Mariinsky, and premiere of the first part of The Ring, the links in the chain that is ready to connect the art and the power. It also showed that Gergiev felt and caught the trend to another restoration, the restoration of Soviet values and Soviet big style on stage. The event, the War and Peace in Putin's present, signaled a new epoch and was defined by the maximum closeness to the new emperor, the president of Russia. Still, of course, roaring 90s didn't finish as abruptly as the roaring 20s. Rimsky-Korsakov-Kitish was staged by Chernigov in 2001. The Ring of the Nibelung was finished in 2003. But still, on the other hand, that were plans from 90s realized in another epoch altogether. In this new epoch, in the 2010s, Moscow's step-by-step return to itself, the status of the Center for New Music and Theatre, and of the performances of the star opera singers, and of opera productions by the leading directors, and innovations in repertoire. The new leader appeared in Russia, Theodor Kurenzis, graduated from the same class at St. Petersburg Conservatory, the class of Ilya Musin, who taught both Timirkanov and Gergiev. Kurenzis, who could have started at Mariinsky, but, as rumors have it, didn't want to follow the cult of the theater director and left Mariinsky, as young Gergiev left Mariinsky in the early 80s, Kirov directed by Timirkanov. And instead, Kurenzis made his revolutions first in Novosibirsk and then in Perm. When a year ago he arrived to St. Petersburg with his orchestra Navickaitė-Martinelli, we kept our fingers crossed in hope that he would transform the music scene that has been stagnating, but it was all freezed by the pandemic. To conclude it all, as we can see, and I should admit with all my critical approach to Valery Gergiev's work, that during the 90s and the chaos of first years of perestroika and fighting for survival and financial stability, Gergiev did manage to provide St. Petersburg and its citizens with what they valued and what they were longing for. He made Mariinsky the center of the music life in the city, the institution where something exciting and significant and revolutionary of high quality was happening. The theater to go for music revelations and unforgettable impressions. For that decade, he gave the city and its citizens the forgotten feeling of capital, at least of the music or opera capital, and the sweet feeling of superiority over Moscow. He did make the city in its music part the window to Europe, to the West, with contacts and contracts, international stars performing on Mariinsky stage and Mariinsky singers singing starting international stars' careers, with Western directors staging operas at Mariinsky and international audience. He reformed the repertoire, returned Wagner, Strauss, introduced Stravinsky, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, put forward Rimsky-Korsakov, and thus both made revolutions and restored traditions. And finally, he won the festival with the same crazy schedule as typical for him, and with the roster of famous performers, his friends, and made again the city to feel its former glory. At the same time, there were downsides, the problems evident already in the 90s. Unrehearsed and sloppy performances, inescapable in the overcrowded schedule. The high price that orchestra musicians and special singers had to pay for this intensive schedule. the bizarre choice and change of opera directors and production styles that showed inconsistency of the artistic decisions, intolerance to the criticism, greed, conjecture, arbitrariness, manager taking over musician, aspirations to absolute power even outside the theater, and political games that supported the regime. Within 2 decades of the 21st century, this side really came down. It outweighed the other. To return to the formula of Leningrad being sort B before Gergiev, the period in the highest league, in the sort A, wasn't long, I'm afraid. But still, the breakthrough in the 90s was made, and it was Gergiev who made it. Thank you so much for your attention, and I am sorry for the time, but I would be happy to hear some questions if you still have time for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga, for your presentation, for your lecture. And
thank you.
While the audience is...
Maybe we can put video in Zoom also.
Yeah. While the audience is preparing the questions, and also I invite to write the questions in chat for those who are online. I want to ask some factology for you, Olga, about Gergiev's concerts abroad that you mentioned in the slide. These concerts, his debuts in Munich, in London, in New York. Who was organizing these tours? Was Gergiev already invited by that companies, or was it organized from Russian side?
I certainly won't be able to answer in details. I'm not so much a historian of his work, but at a certain moment, my colleagues observed that he became also the main tour office or agency for himself and for his friends musicians. So I can just fantasize, which I don't want to do, that he was, for example, invited himself to Metropolitan, and that was organized through his friendship with Placido Domingo, and Domingo suggested that he would conduct at Metropolitan, and who organized it then, it's not so important. But at the moment when he was traveling with his orchestra and the whole theater, it was, I can say, I promised to find out if you're interested. Mm-hmm. Probably himself with his managers. His own managers, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would like to switch the microphone to Ruta Stanevičiūtė. She would like to ask a question for you.
Do you hear me? Okay. So yes. Thank you, Olga, very much for your informative lecture, which inspires to compare situation in St. Petersburg with our Lithuanian or other countries. And I have 2 short questions. Each revolution contains many elements and depends on numerous factors, from human resources to the right historical moment to happen. And Gergiev operatic revolution took place in very special period, yes, the late 80s and 90s, when the society was hungry for new cultural experiences and the cultural atmosphere full of energy. So my first question, do you imagine some revolution to compare in the periods of stagnation? I mean, like now? And another short question, if this Mariinsky revolutionary stage was the only one in Russia at that time?
Thank you, dear Ruta. I mentioned the person who, since mid-2000s, from the mid of that first decade, was making something absolutely fresh, both in his performance style and aesthetics, and in the as an organizer of the musical life around him. It was Tador Kurenzis, of course. Again, he could start to work in Mariinsky, but he preferred, again, like young Gergiev, he preferred, after he worked for several years as assistant of Timirkanov at Kiev Theatre in the 70s and early 80s, he moved to Armenia to become the main conductor there. So Kurenzis moved to Novosibirsk, organized there his orchestra and choir, Musically Eternal, and then from Novosibirsk, where he made revolutionary stagings and performances of, for example, Lady Macbeth of Mutsensk district, or Aida with Dmitry Chernyakov. He moved to Perm, where he inherited Gergiev Festival and completely reorganized, rethought, restructured it. I had the, privilege to be at this Kurenzis Gergiev Festival from 2012. And I experienced something like returning to the mid-90s with Gergiev activities, because it was bursting, vivid, energetic music making without such a tyranny, I would say, and with more, detailed and work. So one of my best remembers and best memories are rehearsals of Kurenzis. So that's why we so much hope that he will change the music life in St. Petersburg when he came last August here. But now, after some spectacular events in the autumn, we should wait until pandemic ends, while Kurenzis making recordings one by one and shows them on their site. And the second question I forgot was, sorry, what was the second question? Second.
Well, another question was if Mariinsky Theatre was the only one revolutionary stage in the 90s in Russia.
Well, on this level, I would say yes, because we had several new theaters which appeared like mushrooms after the rain in the 90s, when it was possible to organize such enterprises. It was St. Petersburg Opera, it was the theater called Through the Looking Glass, Zazerkalye, and they tried to occupy the niche which was not occupied by Mariinsky or Malый Theatre. The newest music by young St. Petersburg composers like Leonid Desyatnikov, the chamber operas or Baroque operas or Mozart operas for the chamber cast. That was a kind of very nice activities, but of course the forces were uncomparable with Mariinsky. I mean, the quality of the voices and the orchestra. So, yeah, small revolution it was, but if we speak about more revolutionary things, it would be in the new music or in the end of 90s early music festival. That was also kind of revolution. I see many, what order? Should I answer the question in Zoom or in chat or in the audience?
Yes, Olga. I would like now to forward you some questions that are in chat, but I have to read them to be audible for all our audience. So the question from our experienced listener, John Van der Wert. He thanks he was hearing you to speak at the Bootleg Opera Conference last week, and now he was listening to your lecture here. So his question, could you expand upon how these festivals were funded? Did Gergiev had to combat troubles with funding opportunities for his stagings and festivals? During the 30s and 40s, funding was routinely taken away and redistributed by the government. So I'm curious to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And I suppose you recognized a bit which I quoted from my booklet paper about Galina Gorchakova. And thank you for your question, because I tried to, let's say, escape these financial problems, though, of course, some people, some observers, some critics said that they were in the basement. That's what Gergiev really fought with. Had to deal with, and that's why he did some things which unexplainable otherwise. So in the end of 80s, the state support was lost. To what extent, it different with each organization, but it took quite a long time until, for example, Philharmonic Orchestra and the Mariinsky Theatre, as well as Conservatory, got special grants from president. It was already Putin, so it had to wait quite a long time. But in the 90s, all these institutions were left, to their own money making, and some of them just didn't know how to start with and what to start with. So both Timirkanov and Gergiev's tours were also earning money. In the recent book on Metropolitan Opera, they often just say, so Gergiev arrived, they performed, and he returned to St. Petersburg with dollars. That's quite simple answer, but he used different strategies to try to push on our authorities. He would go and speak with Yeltsin, with the government. He would speak with business, trying to force them to fund Mariinsky more. And until last interviews, he would talk that it's unfair that Bolshoi, for example, has more finances. In every interview, every long read, you would find the phrase that, again, this long read by Alex Ross, which I mentioned, he says that Gergiev just received the news that instead of 13 millions, anyway, he received half of the sum he would hope for, he was promised to. Therefore, sponsors from Russian sponsors, the circle of the sponsors from abroad, all the ways of finding money. But what is, again, downside is that he didn't stop there. And being now the richest man himself in this business, he goes on, and the whole production of all these 3-4 halls of Mariinsky now are working for the money. Sorry for the long answer, but I hope I made something clear. Next,
and Olga, your last sentences somehow go to the next question. Peter Schmelz is asking, can you talk a bit more about Gergiev's current plans? Has there been any talk of a successor at the Mariinsky? And is there any talk of his retirement at any point?
Thank you, Peter. When I was preparing to this conference, I looked for interviews and found several interesting talks with Vladimir Pozner, for example, who is quite critical and sees the points and asks uncomfortable questions, and with infamous Solomon Volkov, who asks quite comfortable questions. But when they speak about, Gergiev starts to talk, when he speaks about his possible successor, possible in the far future, not now, it's very interesting. Just having told Volkov the story how young he was when he became the director of the Mariinsky. as about his successor, he's talking like it should be a master, a mature, famous musician, a leader, manager, Solomon Volkov guesses, workaholic, and, I remember, just a moment, a leader of the global scale. I liked it very much. So I think no talk about future retirement, just about new halls here and everywhere.
So thank you, Olga, for your presentation once more. As the conference is approaching to the end, I would like to ask Ruta to say some final words. Some final words for this closing and for sending greetings to all of you.
So now we have something like a time for closing remarks, but even before conference, together with Rima, we decided to conclude a conference in a very musical way with an answered question. So I think that the very topic of this conference was really challenging, and it's impossible to stop that discussion. So I would like just to thank all you speakers, active and passive participants for contribution to this conference. And I should remember that with our Baltic conferences, they are biannual. And of course, this time we had challenge to adapt to a very new format. And my apologies if something was not so perfect, because it was our first experience in this mixed live and Zoom format. But I hope very much that in 2 years, in the autumn, early autumn, September of 2022, we are really hope to welcome and to host you here in Vilnius in person. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ruta?
Yes, Olga, we are listening to you. We hear you.
Thank you so much again for your brilliant organizers. I take off, I'll say, снимаю шляпу, take off my hat before your,
okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I try to see positive sides of this experience. At least we don't need to think about trains, planes, monies, and so on, but I hope to see you all alive. I mean, in flesh. Okay, and I had just a request not to put off the Zoom conference for some time, if it's possible, after the end of the conference, if it's possible.
Yeah, we will see.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you, and see you in near future.